Introduction: the gas of existence, the dispersion of the biomass. Observe the behavior of matter in its most primitive and chaotic state: gas. In fluid physics, a gas is characterized by the total absence of structural cohesion. Its particles float adrift, collide erratically, bounce without purpose, and expand hysterically until they fill and dissipate in any empty container. It has no defined shape. Gas has no gravitational density and, above all, lacks the inertial force necessary to alter the geometry of its environment. It is the weakest and most malleable form of physical existence. Subject this thermodynamic law to the neurology of contemporary civilization. The attention of the human biomass operates in a truly deplorable state. The average modern individual is a cloud of mental particles in constant thermal boiling. They float through the three-dimensional ecosystem, reacting pathetically to every bright stimulus designed for them. They consume media noise, let themselves be dragged by the ephemeral drama of others, and evaporate their vital voltage in cheap fun. This entertainment only serves to numb the pain of their own insignificance. Their potential energy dissipates in millions of useless directions. The optical illusion of three-dimensional society is to call this tragedy being busy, modern productivity, or multitasking. The lethal operator diagnoses it with clinical coldness. It is a truly lethal thermodynamic hemorrhage. Distraction is not a simple problem of daily schedule management or a minor corporate productivity failure. It is the absolute quantum suicide of your gravity. When your mind operates in the lightness of a gas, you lack the weight necessary to force physical reality to bend before you. You become translucent. The market ignores you. Your competitors cross through you without feeling friction, and your financial empire evaporates prematurely. The inferior parasitic system desperately needs you to keep your mind in this gaseous and fragmented state. A dispersed mind is a mind unable to collapse the wave function. It is an inoffensive entity. To govern the matrix, you must subject your own biology to the voluntary annihilation of the fluid and gaseous state. This treatise is the architecture of that inertial execution. Here, the veto on lightness is martially established, the absolute and non-negotiable repudiation of your thermal dispersion. Prepare to initiate the most violent process of thermodynamic condensation that a human psyche can endure. You are going to learn to drastically cool the hysterical temperature of your stimuli, compressing the cloud of your attention until forcing an irreversible phase transition. You will transform the chaotic gas of your impulses. You will become a hyperdense, monolithic and deaf iridium core, a core so obscenely heavy that the exterior ecosystem, with all its screens, urgencies and screams, is mathematically incapable of disturbing it a single millimeter. Biological dispersion is dead. Welcome to the tyrannical empire of pure focus. Chapter 1. Thermodynamics of leakage, the atomic cost of distraction. The creator's immaterial blood, attention as gravitational mass. To establish the veto on lightness with the brutality required by the crystal prison, you must subject your understanding of consciousness to a quantum autopsy. The human biomass perceives attention as an unlimited resource, a cheap spotlight they can turn on and off. They believe looking at a screen is a free act. This is the ignorance that guarantees their slavery. In the physics of manifestation, attention is not a beam of light. It is the only real gravitational mass the Creator possesses. It is your immaterial blood. When you focus attention on a space-time coordinate, your consciousness injects electrons of density into that coordinate. You force the wave function to collapse under the weight of your gaze. Therefore, distraction is not a temporary slip. Distraction is a lethal thermodynamic hemorrhage. Every millisecond your mind turns away to process an irrelevant stimulus, you are cutting the jugular vein of your empire. You are bleeding your density into the void. The lethal operator understands that looking away is the most destructive act of atomic cowardice he can commit. It is equivalent to handing over the weight of his own gravity to the entropy of chaos. He guards his focus as if it were the last drop of oxygen in a vacuum, knowing that focus is the substance of all material rule. The law of attentional entropy, the universe demands dissipation. You must subject your mind's weakness to the second law of thermodynamics. The fundamental equation of microscopic entropy, ds0, establishes that in any isolated system, disorder always tends to increase. The physical universe detests order and concentration. Its natural state is absolute dissipation and scattered heat. Your biological mind, being a product of the material universe, is programmed by evolution to obey this entropic law. Your inferior brain wants to dissipate. It seeks to scatter its tactical energy by opening multiple fronts, paying attention to holographic news, social conflict, and the trivialities of the insects around you. We catalogue this tendency as attentional entropy. The hyper-dense creator must instate a paramilitary dictatorship against his own biology. Maintaining absolute focus on a single point, holding an iridium gaze on the objective, is an unnatural act. It is the definitive thermodynamic rebellion. It requires you to act as a vacuum pump. You must constantly suck in the energy that the universe tries to dissipate and compress it into the core of your skull. When you get distracted, you are not simply wasting time. You are losing the war against entropy. You are allowing the second law of thermodynamics to dissolve the architecture of your empire into human mediocrity. The parasite's design, the matrix as a thermal extractor. You are not losing your attention by accident. The three-dimensional ecosystem, the parasitic egregore that governs the consumer society, has been designed by chaos engineers with a single purpose: to extract your inertial heat. The economy of the ashboard is not based on money. It is based on the expropriation of your focus. Technological platforms and media are quantum syringes stuck in your prefrontal cortex. They have discovered that if they get your mind to oscillate between fear, desire, and cheap comedy, your brain generates massive convective friction. That heat, that thermal leak, feeds the matrix and leaves you exhausted and lacking mass. The veto on lightness demands that you recognize every unsolicited stimulus as a direct attack on your sovereignty. When a device beeps or someone brings you an urgency that is not yours, you are not facing information, you are facing a thermal predator. The operator assumes the gelida paranoia of isolating his attention entirely. The inertial penalty, the weight of restarting the gear. The inferior biomass is addicted to micro-distraction. They believe looking at an external stimulus for 5 seconds has no real cost, as long as they quickly return to work. This belief exposes their absolute ignorance of inertial physics. Imagine operating a 10,000-ton freight train. Putting that mass in motion is hard. It requires a monstrous injection of initial energy just to overcome the resistance of rest. Once the train reaches its cruising speed, inertia does the work. It requires very little energy to stay in motion, the zero friction of deep focus. If you stop the train of your concentration for 5 seconds, inertia breaks instantly. The train stops completely. To return to your state of hyperdensity, you cannot simply pick up where you left off. You must pay the inertial penalty again. You have to burn astronomical amounts of glucose and voltage to reach depth again. A slave who is distracted 20 times a day is starting and stopping a train continuously. At the end of the solar cycle, his nervous system is calcined, his energy exhausted, and his train has barely moved a few meters. The creator starts only once and does not break until the three-dimensional universe has collapsed under his mandate. He understands that the price of the first centimeter is the highest cost of the day. The guillotine of biological curiosity, the animal instinct. To seal thermodynamic leaks, you must execute a painful amputation on the ego, the castration of curiosity. In mammalian evolution, curiosity was a survival tool. The animal needed to explore new sounds and tracks to not be devoured. Curiosity is the instinct of the terrified prey scanning its surroundings for alterations. Inside the crystal prison, biological curiosity is a cancer of lightness. Why should you feel curiosity about what the market or the herd does if you are the singularity that dictates the rules? Curiosity implies you believe the exterior contains more valuable information than your interior certainty. It is a confession of low density. The lethal operator instates tactical blindness. You forbid yourself from wanting to know. You forbid yourself from finding out the end of irrelevant stories or investigating secondary noises. If information is not a direct collision data affecting your conquest, you apply the obsidian guillotine. This isolates you from the noise. The gaseous rest fraud, the fatigue of false inactivity. When the worker of the 3D system becomes exhausted, he resorts to rest. His definition of rest consists of leaving his main task to submerge himself in the black screen of empty stimulation. They lie down and consume hours of fast content, jumping from one image to another, absorbing disconnected colors and sounds. Diagnose this behavior under the laws of thermodynamics. That so-called rest is actually an accelerated friction chamber. Although the carbon body is motionless, the brain is undergoing a bombardment of micro-collapses. Attention is being shredded into fragments. Upon returning to work, the individual feels more fatigued. He has filled his mind with gas and dissolved his gravity. The monarch does not rest by consuming lightness. The operator's rest is absolute immobility or sensory blackout. It is the geological silence of the anechoic chamber. You do not feed the reactor with algorithmic trash, you cut off the supply of external oxygen. The rapid oscillation syndrome, the multitasking myth. The Matrix has glorified multitasking as the pinnacle of efficiency. They train their financial slaves to answer emails, analyze charts, and consume news simultaneously. Neurobiology dismantles this fallacy. The human brain is unable to process two complex lines of thought simultaneously. Multitasking is a terminal lie. What the biomass calls multitasking is actually rapid oscillation syndrome. The neuronal processor jumps frantically from one task to another, turning neuronal networks on and off at a hysterical speed. This requires massive caloric expenditure. It is like driving a vehicle while flooring the gas in the brake at every meter. It destroys deep analytical capacity. Decisions taken in this state are liquid and lack inertial weight. To apply the veto on lightness, you must murder the myth of oscillation. You embrace monolithic execution, the single thread. When you structure a maneuver, that is the only reality that exists in the universe for 10 hours. The outside world can burst into flames, and you will not divert your iridium retina a single millimeter. The single task, held with the oppressive brutality of a tectonic plate, possesses a density that no multitasking juggler can ever scratch. You are a needle of focused pressure that pierces through any material resistance. Devaluation of the environment, the repudiation of social respect. The individual trying to concentrate often fails because he suffers from a mortal disease, social respect. They are afraid of offending the ecosystem. If they are in a state of deep flow and an individual interrupts them, they answer out of politeness. They allow social pressure to pierce their isolation out of tribal fear. If you are going to rule the crystal prison, your geometric arrogance must be non-negotiable. You must execute the devaluation of the environment. Your concentration and inertial core are worth infinitely more than the biological feelings of the dross trying to interrupt you. You cannot apologize for being a heavy entity. You instate a psychological terror around you. The biomass must learn that crossing your perimeter during your state of hyperdensity does not result in polite conversation, but in an ice barrier or an aggressive relational amputation. By devaluing social convention, you inform the universe that your mass is not up for negotiation. The containment dike, building the impermeable membrane. For the veto on lightness not to be a mere effort of will, it must become a physical and immaterial architecture. You must build the containment dike. Do not trust your self-control against screens. Self-control is for those who still hope to talk with temptation. The operator executes the design of absolute isolation. You destroy physical access vectors. You modify your corporate and digital environment so unauthorized information has no bridge to enter. You eradicate recommendation algorithms. You silence all frequencies not emitted by your own radar. By automating tactical blindness, you free your mind from the effort of resisting. The containment dike ensures that only pure, filtered, cold, and mathematical data that you yourself requested can reach your visual cortex. You have sterilized the room. The gas of society remains hitting the bulletproof glass from the outside, unable to filter a single molecule of lightness into the lethal purity of your void. The tyranny of the laser pointer, inorganic matter collapse. The final phase is the offensive instrumentation of your condensed energy. Once you have stopped the bleeding and instated tactical blindness, all that inertial mass that the 3D world stole from you daily accumulates at your center. The atmospheric pressure inside your skull reaches operative absolute zero. You are now a laser. Your consciousness ceases to be an incandescent lamp and transmutes into a perfectly collimated laser pointer. In this state of attentional hyperdensity, the veto on lightness becomes a siege weapon. When you aim this laser at a problem or a competitor's weakness, physical reality cannot withstand the density of your gaze. Material matter melts under the laser beam of your focus. You no longer solve conflicts by operating frantically. You solve them by subjecting them to the uninterrupted radiation of your isolated consciousness. Execution becomes obscenely easy because all the voltage humanity wastes, you are applying like a hydraulic press. The titan of absolute focus. Look at yourself in the amazing sterility of your anechoic chamber, having decapitated the thermodynamic leak that kept humanity enslaved. You managed to suffocate the gas of existence. You understood that attention is the immaterial blood of your gravity, and you refused to bleed on the altars of entertainment and dispersion. You mutilated the law of attentional entropy, becoming the vacuum pump that sucks order from the surrounding chaos to concentrate it in your mind. You executed the knowledge of the parasite's design, identifying the matrix as the heat extractor and punishing each external stimulus with obsidian silence. You are the monolith. You annihilated the inertial penalty, refusing to slow down the train of your consciousness to please the ecosystem's urgency. You instated the guillotine of curiosity, amputating the mammalian instinct. You dismantled the gaseous rest fraud, cooling the reactor only in absolute zero. You embraced the single-thread tyranny. Finally, you erected the containment dike, devaluing social respect and building an impermeable membrane that guarantees laser concentration. Dispersion is dead. Your mind is no longer a malleable fluid. It is a hyperdense iridium needle. You are the titan of absolute focus. The first vault has been sealed. Prepare for mastery. Chapter 2. The sensory guillotine, amputating the ecosystem's noise. The physics of sympathetic resonance, the danger of shared vibration. To understand the magnitude of the threat that the 3D ecosystem represents for your inertial mass, you must subject the concept of noise to the laws of acoustics and thermodynamics. In wave physics, a devastating phenomenon exists known as sympathetic resonance. If you place two tuning forks of the same frequency in a room and hit only one, the sound waves will travel through the air, strike the second tuning fork, and force it to vibrate at exactly the same frequency without anyone having physically touched it. The first object has transferred its kinetic energy to the second through the permeability of the medium. Human mind biology operates under this same physical principle, but it does so with a terrifying vulnerability. The slave's brain is a highly receptive tuning fork, designed by millennia of tribal evolution to tune into the emotional state of his herd. If the herd screams, the slave screams. If the tribe panics, the individual's nervous system enters sympathetic resonance and begins to secrete cortisol. The individual begins imitating the terror of the environment. The lethal operator who wishes to establish the veto on lightness must diagnose this permeability as an unacceptable structural failure. Your empire cannot be sustained if your core trembles every time the outside world strikes its own tuning fork of hysteria. You must stop it. When you listen to holographic news or attend to the wails of the biomass, you are allowing an external force to dictate your oscillation frequency. You are ceding control of your internal thermodynamics. For the crystal prison to acquire its condition of invulnerability, you must transmute the structure of your mind into something else. You must stop being a light metal tuning fork and become an osmium-lined anechoic chamber. You must apply a physical and psychological armor so dense that the panic waves of society crash against it and disintegrate into the most absolute silence without managing to alter a single millimeter of your inertial stasis. You are the silence. The ecosystem as an acoustic weapon, the egregor's bombardment. The matrix is not a neutral environment. It is a battlefield designed to fragment your attention through constant suppressive fire. The inferior parasitic system does not bombard you with noise because it wants to keep you informed or connected. It bombards you with noise to execute a distributed denial of service (DDoS) attack. In computer systems architecture, a DDoS attack saturates a server by sending millions of simultaneous data requests until the server exhausts its bandwidth, overheats, and collapses, becoming unable to process the orders that truly matter. The human, social, and media ecosystem applies exactly this same siege tactic on your prefrontal cortex. The screens surrounding you, the notifications lighting up your devices, and manufactured dramas are millions of junk data packets sent to your neuronal processor. The egregor's goal is to saturate your cognitive bandwidth. If your brain is busy processing fear of a war or irrelevant gossip, it will have no voltage left for your success. It will have no energy to calculate the geometry of your financial expropriation, nor to collapse the wave function of your own triumph. By keeping you in a perpetual state of processing trash, the matrix ensures you never reach hyperdensity. It keeps you in a gaseous state. Noise is a weapon designed to keep you from your own gravity. The obsidian guillotine, the amputation protocol. The biomass, when it realizes it is being devoured by noise, tries to apply methods of moderation. They talk about temporary digital detox or healthy limits. The hyperdense creator repudiates moderation. Moderation is the pathetic attempt of a weak organism to negotiate with poison. It is a thermal illusion that fails. It is the illusion of one who believes they can caress fire without calcining their fingers. The veto on lightness does not negotiate, it executes. You instate the sensory guillotine. The amputation protocol requires cold, paramilitary violence. You do not reduce your exposure to noise, you decapitate it entirely and without mercy. You raise an obsidian guillotine and cut off all data supply lines that do not directly feed the inertial expansion of your empire. You elude the relevant information trap. If information is not a mathematical calculation, a market state, or a ballistic tool to be used in the next 24 hours, it is thermodynamic dross. You uninstall, block, isolate, and burn the bridges. You eliminate applications designed for infinite flow. You silence all alarms and vibrations of your technological perimeter. Your devices cease to be open doors for the world to scream at you and transmute into closed terminals. The sensory guillotine is the act of ultimate arrogance. Tactical deafness, repudiating the 3D alarm. Once digital amputation is executed, the next frontier of the siege is direct biological interaction. The human environment is a perpetual alarm siren. Your employees, partners, and supposed friends operate under a constant state of thermal emergency. They will run toward you demanding that you listen to their complaints and fears. Acoustic empathy is the leakage of gravity. To seal the perimeter, the operator adopts tactical deafness. Tactical deafness is not a hearing problem. It is a voluntary cognitive mutilation. When an individual approaches to inject their anxiety into your field, you deactivate the meaning decoder of your brain. You hear only noise. You hear the sound of their vocal cords vibrating in the air, but you refuse to assemble those sounds into concepts that alter your basal temperature. You look them in the eye with the iridium eye, sustaining eye contact with a lethargic immobility, while you allow their words to bounce off your skull like stones against tank armor. You do not nod. You do not emit validation sounds. You do not grant them the alms of your comfort. When the intruder realizes that their hysterical alarm is being absorbed by a black hole that emits not a single photon of empathy, their frequency collapses. The biomass is left speechless. Their emergencies have no jurisdiction here. Spectral blindness, restricting the visual field. Vision is the sense that consumes the greatest amount of metabolic energy in the human brain. Through the retina, millions of megabytes of information enter per second. The slave walks through his corporation with an erratic gaze, looking for stimuli, looking at others' faces for validation, scanning the environment like a scared animal. This peripheral vision is the thermodynamic sink of lightness. Distraction always enters through the flanks. To operate under the tyranny of the single thread, the creator implants spectral blindness. You voluntarily reduce yourself to tunnel vision. When you move toward a target, you extirpate consciousness from your periphery. Your pupils fix exclusively on destination coordinates. You do not look sideways. You do not return crossed glances. If a secondary event explodes 2 meters from you, you do not turn your neck. This paramilitary restriction of the visual field has a terrifying effect on your brain density. All voltage is redirected toward the focal center. Your gaze becomes a zero-friction laser that calcines the target, while the rest of the universe fades into an irrelevant blackness. Spectral blindness is the geometric refusal to recognize the existence of any matter that does not contribute directly to your inertial expansion. You see only the coordinate of your absolute triumph. Perimeter sterilization, architecture of isolation. Noise amputation cannot depend solely on mental willpower. Biological will is a finite battery that exhausts itself with continuous effort. If you sit in a room full of visual junk and ordered objects and use your will to try to ignore them, you are burning kinetic energy in defense. The lethal operator does not defend, he designs. He designs the battlefield so defense is unnecessary. You execute perimeter sterilization. You transform your workspace into a sterile desert of iridium and obsidian. You eradicate physical disorder, because disorder is the 3D representation of attentional chaos. Every irrelevant object is a magnetic anchor pulling at your retina. You eliminate them, you empty the walls, you strip your physical environment of any element containing memory, nostalgia, or entertainment. The operator's minimalism is not a choice of decoration. It is a thermodynamic necessity for the survival of hyperdensity. You have sterilized the operating room to operate reality itself. Murdering availability, the unreachable ghost. Modern slavery is defined by the tyranny of absolute availability. 3D society demands its members be accessible at all times. If a slave does not answer a message in minutes, the matrix punishes him with social defamation. They teach you that being always available is a virtue. Subject this to the thermodynamics of leakage. If any inferior organism of the ashboard can introduce a vibration in your pocket or knock on your door at will, then you are not the owner of your space-time. You are a thermodynamic prostitute, handing over your potential energy to the highest bidder who deigns to interrupt you. To crystallize your empire, you must kill availability. You become the unreachable ghost. You destroy the expectation of immediacy. Your communication channels must be surrounded by trenches, minefields, and ice walls. No one has the inertial right to pierce your stasis without your prior, aseptic, and calculated consent. If the world burns, it will burn until you decide to open the hatch. Intruder friction, thermodynamic punishment. Despite obsidian walls and the containment dike, at some point, a specimen will try to violate the perimeter. An intruder will try to cross the line to inject their lightness, haste, or irrelevant conversation into your vacuum chamber. When the barrier is crossed, the average slave reacts with politeness. This is a repulsive betrayal. The lethal operator applies intruder friction. It is the thermodynamic punishment for the desecration of the temple. When the invader breaks into your stasis, you do not emit a word of welcome. You do not adjust your posture. You turn your skull with mechanical slowness and apply the overwhelming weight of the dead presence. You observe him with a silence so thick and so devoid of human warmth that the atmospheric pressure in the intruder's chest becomes unbearable. It is not necessary to scream. The acoustic vacuum of your gaze informs his reptilian system that his presence is a lethal miscalculation. He will flee, devoured by his own thermal shame. Data fasting, detoxification, and atomic purge. The sensory guillotine is not a one-time event. It requires structural maintenance to prevent entropy from rooting back into your neural circuits. The maintenance tool for hyperdensity is extreme data fasting. The biological body performs autophagy when deprived of food. The brain performs an identical process when deprived of data. In calculated intervals, the lethal operator enters the immaterial deprivation chamber. You close corporate hatches. You turn off the servers of your interaction with the ecosystem. You withdraw to the static core of your crystal prison and execute a total data blackout for days. Zero news, zero screens, zero biomass conversations. The first moments of data fasting will produce a terrifying biological withdrawal in your carbon avatar. The brain, addicted to dopamine gas, will scream for its dose of external friction. You endure the tremor with paramilitary lethargy. As you cross the threshold of anxiety, the noise fades. Your focus regains its blinding sharpness. Soundless density, the birth of the absolute voice. The total amputation of the ecosystem's noise culminates in an internal acoustic phenomenon of deific proportions. When the obsidian guillotine, tactical deafness, and spectral blindness have closed the infiltration routes, a silence occurs that would terrify any mortal. It is soundless density. This is where your power is born. In this absolute vacuum, where the wails of the market are no longer heard, your absolute voice is born. Most human biomass never hears its own inertial voice because it is suffocated under metric tons of cheap stimuli. They are simply a biological echo of their environment, but you are left alone with the pure decree of your density. This voice does not reason with fear. It is the mechanical order of the observer, preparing to expropriate the matrix. In the empire of soundless density, each thought has the mass of a continent. Your strategies and calculations crystallize with unbreakable geometric purity. You are the law that governs the destiny of all around you, the sovereign of the anechoic chamber. Look at yourself in the abyssal and surgical stillness of your own mind, having eradicated the chaos virus that corrodes the attention of 3D civilization. You manage to suffocate the physics of sympathetic resonance. You refuse to be the tuning fork of slaves. You mutilated the DDoS attack of the egregore and executed the guillotine. You instated tactical deafness, becoming psychopathically insensitive to social alarm. You imparted spectral blindness, extirpating the periphery to collimate your vision. You sterilized your perimeter, building the geography of isolation where physical chaos is outlawed by inertial mandate. You are the master of your own vacuum. You murdered availability and applied intruder friction, thermally punishing with the iridium eye anyone who dared to violate your sanctuary. You executed the data fast to purge toxicity. The external ecosystem can no longer scream at you. You are the sovereign of the anechoic chamber. The second vault is sealed. You are ready. Chapter 3. Laser collimation, unifying mental voltage. The physics of dispersed photons, the incandescent mind. To establish the veto on lightness with the surgical brutality required by the architecture of power, you must subject the nature of your own attention to the laws of optics and quantum mechanics. The 3D ecosystem has deceived you regarding the nature of mental energy. They taught you to measure value by tasks and influence. They have conditioned you to be an incandescent light bulb. Apply the scalpel of thermodynamics to this metaphor. A common incandescent bulb emits photons chaotically. It radiates light in all directions, 360 degrees, and in multiple frequencies. Due to this dispersion, the bulb's energy weakens every millimeter it advances. It dimly lights an entire room, but is unable to generate the heat necessary to alter the structure of the matter it illuminates. Even worse, 90% of the energy an incandescent bulb consumes is wasted as useless convective heat, entropy. Only 10% becomes visible light. The slave mind operates under this physics. The human brain consumes approximately 20 watts of metabolic power. The average individual dissipates those 20 watts trying to light an immense room. They worry about work, public opinion, debt, and global news all at once. Their mental photons bounce in 1,000 directions. They generate stress, but alter nothing. The principle of stimulated emission, the birth of coherent light. The lethal operator diagnoses attentional dispersion as a structural failure and executes a radical intervention, the transition from incandescent light to stimulated emission of radiation. The laser. In quantum physics, a laser does not require magical amounts of energy. The difference is not volume, but its coherence. In a laser beam, all photons travel exactly in the same geometric direction. More importantly, they travel in perfect phase synchronization. The peaks and valleys of their electromagnetic waves are aligned, adding their amplitudes instead of cancelling each other. When waves do not compete, the light collimates. A laser of just a few watts, by condensing all its energy into a microscopic point, is capable of raising the temperature of matter until vaporizing titanium and cutting armored steel. Laser collimation in your psyche is the process of unifying your mental voltage. It is the paramilitary act of withdrawing every millivolt. You must withdraw every millivolt of attention invested in the hundreds of open fronts of your life and force them to travel in a single coherent, oppressive ray toward a single geometric coordinate. You do not need more energy or more hours. You need to amputate dispersion so your brain can cut the three-dimensional matrix. The collimator's punishment, the guillotine of good alternatives. For light to become a laser, it must pass through a collimator, an optical device that ruthlessly blocks all rays of light that do not travel parallel to the central axis. Physics is cruel. Divergent photons must be destroyed by the collimator to guarantee the ray's purity. In domination, this is voluntary renunciation. This is where the inferior biomass collapses. The slave is willing to give up bad habits, but is unable to give up good alternatives. They have multiple hobbies and read 20 books at once. They want to embrace everything for fear of missing out. To instate the veto, you must subject ambitions to the collimator. You forbid yourself attentional diversification. You identify your primary expropriation mandate and raise obsidian walls around it. All other brilliant ideas, profitable secondary projects, and non-core relationships must be blocked and annihilated by your tactical blindness. It is a psychological violence against your ego. It implies accepting that 99% of reality will cease to exist for you. You have to murder your own secondary ideas with the same coldness with which a surgeon removes a tumor. If it does not travel parallel to your central axis of conquest, it is a dissident photon and must be decapitated to save the laser. Phase synchronization, the eradication of internal friction. Physical collimation is not enough if the light is not coherent. In wave theory, destructive interference occurs when two waves are out of phase. When the peak of one wave meets the valley of another, they cancel each other out, resulting in zero energy. This is the secret anatomy of human failure. The weak individual may try to concentrate on a goal, but his mind harbors out-of-phase waves. They desire absolute wealth, but simultaneously harbor the subconscious fear of the tribe's moral judgment. They want power, but fear the solitude of the summit. These contradictory intentions are waves that cancel each other. His brain is burning industrial amounts of glucose to emit two opposite frequencies simultaneously. The result is paralysis and chronic exhaustion without having advanced a single millimeter. Collimation demands phase synchronization. You must purge your system of any moral conviction or fear not aligned with your objective. You must become monolithic in your desires. If you decide to crush a competitor, you forbid yourself from feeling mercy. If you decide to accumulate financial density, you extirpate social shame. You align intellect, animal instinct, and coldness under one frequency. This eliminates internal friction and triggers quantum efficiency. The paradox of effort, why the biomass sweats. The 3D control system has canonized muscular effort and brute force as the only paths to greatness. They indoctrinate you to push the rock uphill until you bleed, teaching you that the pain of friction is the measure of your merit. Subject effort to high-density optics. The biomass is misled by this thermal lie. If you have an incandescent bulb and want it to melt a steel plate, the only way is to press the bulb physically against the steel with all your strength. The result is that the glass will break, you will bleed, and the steel remains intact. This is what humanity does. They push dispersed minds against the economy. The creator who operates the mental laser does not push. The laser beam does not require you to exert physical force against the object. The laser cuts from a distance. It does not sweat. It does not break. Its capacity to alter matter comes from the soundless transfer of photonic energy over a specific atomic point. When you unify your mental voltage through the veto on lightness, hard work becomes obsolete. Since all your energy is concentrated in a microscopic diameter, the resistance of the market or adversaries melts before your simple, uninterrupted observation. You sit in your crystal prison and watch the ecosystem yield. Immunity to social refraction, the vacuum index. In optics, when a ray of light passes from one medium to another of different density, the ray bends. This is refraction. In the sociology of domination, refraction is the effect of social friction on your focus. You can have your laser collimated toward a goal, but your energy must cross the medium of society. This medium is composed of cheap morality and unsolicited opinions. When the slave's mental ray crosses society, The herd's thermal density bends their ray. They deviate. They start wanting a monopoly and end up pleasing a board. They have suffered refraction. The lethal operator imposes a vacuum index on his laser. In the vacuum of space, there is no matter. Therefore, the refractive index is exactly 1.0. Light travels in an unbreakable straight line. By adopting psychopathic lethargy and absolute contempt for the ecosystem, you become an acoustic vacuum. When society tries to bend your path, your laser ignores its existence. You refuse to yield a single geometric degree of your trajectory. The market will realize that trying to divert your attention is as useless as trying to bend starlight by pointing a fan at it. They simply do not have the physical jurisdiction to alter your vector. You are an unalterable constant in their chaotic world. The geometric focal point, cornering wave function collapse. A laser can be perfectly collimated, but to generate the critical temperature capable of disintegrating matter, it requires a geometric focal point. This is the exact coordinate where intensity tends to infinity. In the mind, the focal point is the eradication of generalities. The inferior biomass has gaseous goals. They say, "I want to be rich." These statements lack edges. They are amorphous clouds that provide no atomic target for the laser. The universe does not obey generalities. Physics only recognizes precise coordinates. To weaponize your voltage, you must configure your iridium lens to converge on a brutally specific point. You do not seek power. You point your laser toward the exact expropriation of a specific financial asset on an unmovable date, using a legal vehicle dictated with millimetric precision. You reduce the universe to a single particle of reality to be conquered today. This makes wave function collapse inevitable. By concentrating your entire electromagnetic field on that infinitesimal point, you corner statistical probability. Since you leave no room for matter to escape the annihilation zone, the obstacle's atom explodes, giving you control of its resources by simple thermodynamic submission. Precision is your most lethal asset. Ballistic boredom. Enduring the slowness of the cut. The reptile in your brain, addicted to spectacle and agitation, will rebel against coherent light because it lacks dopamine. The biomass believes empire building must be an epic adventure full of drama. Laser collimation destroys this illusion. Using an industrial laser is not a fireworks display. It is a blind, slow process. You must instate ballistic boredom. When you have locked the target and turned on the laser of your collimated attention, the order is absolute immobility. Your task consists exclusively of keeping the ray fixed on the same geometric point for weeks, without a shaking pulse. There are no explosions of joy here. There is no daily motivation. You do not change the angle because you are bored of waiting. If you withdraw the laser halfway through the cut out of impatience, the steel cools instantly, and you have wasted all your energy. The unalterable monarch endures the extreme monotony of sustained execution until the wall collapses. This tolerance for total absence of stimulus and fun is the geological barrier separating ephemeral spark creators from the gods of zero friction. You watch your immaterial mandate slowly melt the foundations of your competitor, enduring the sepulchral silence of the matrix. You win through the cold persistence of your gaze. Thermal fusion of the environment, passive assimilation. The final impact of a perfect laser happens not only on the target, but in the behavior of surrounding matter. When you concentrate immense energy on a microscopic point, a plasma is generated. The target melts, and the extreme heat radiated from that focal point begins to melt adjacent structures passively. This is the phenomenon of thermal fusion of the environment. The dispersed individual tries to improve his life by attacking all problems simultaneously. They want to improve fitness, finances, and intellect at once. As a result, they improve nothing, because their light never reaches the melting temperature. The operator who applies the veto on lightness selects a single fundamental goal. Generally, it is the mastery of a financial vehicle. He ignores all else. When his laser finally disintegrates that single target, that massive power resolves the rest of the secondary problems by thermal inertia. Capital silences critics. Iridium status subdues collateral competition. Hyperdense victory on a single front melts the barriers of the rest of your existence by simple passive radiation. You have cleaned the entire room by concentrating with psychopathic violence on a single millimeter of the floor. You dominate through localized intensity. The Lord of Coherent Light, look at yourself in the desolate stillness of your own mind, having eradicated the stupid boiling of the incandescent bulb that consumed your life. You managed to suffocate the physics of dispersed photons. You understood that fragmented attention was the thermodynamic suicide of slaves. You are now coherent light. You transmuted your brain energy through the principle of stimulated emission. You mutilated dispersion by applying the collimator's punishment, raising the guillotine over secondary projects and useful distractions. You executed phase synchronization, extirpating internal friction so your voltage reached its maximum. You murdered the fraud of muscular effort, embracing the coldness of cutting matter from a distance without the humiliation of sweat. You instated immunity to social refraction, adopting a vacuum index that allows you to cross the moral noise of the tribe without bending your trajectory a single degree. You adjusted the iridium lens on the geometric focal point, concentrating density on an exact coordinate. You adopted ballistic boredom, tolerating the suffocating monotony until the obstacle melted, and you watched the thermal fusion of that impact melt your reality's walls. The bulb is out. You are radiation. Chapter 4. Entertainment Asphyxiation. The repudiation of cheap fire. The escape valve, the sabotage of inertial pressure. For the veto on lightness to transcend mere theory and become a hydraulic press capable of crushing 3D reality, the lethal operator must subject leisure culture to fluid mechanics dissection. Human society has canonized the concept of free time. They have indoctrinated you to believe in the right to unwind. Subject this lie to the physics of contained pressure. Imagine the boiler of a 10,000-ton steel locomotive. For that metal beast to move and crush obstacles on the track, the water inside must boil and become steam, generating colossal atmospheric pressure. If the pressure has no escape, it is forced to push the pistons. But what if the engineer, scared by the buildup, decides to open a safety valve to let the steam out? The boiler whistles, makes a pleasant noise, the pressure drops to safe levels, and the train stops. Entertainment is the biomass's escape valve. The slave feels the pressure of his own financial or territorial mediocrity. That pressure is the nuclear fuel nature grants to destroy shackles and expropriate power. But the slave fears his own pressure. He feels anxiety. So instead of directing that voltage toward the pistons of his empire, he turns on a screen. He watches a series or consumes pornography. He opens the valve. The steam escapes into nothingness. The anatomy of the analgesic, dopamine and neuronal extortion. Entertainment is not a harmless gift. It is a neurobiological hack designed with military precision by the architects of the ash board. The mammalian brain operates under the dopaminergic reward circuit. For millennia, dopamine was released when the organism achieved something difficult, hunting prey or conquering territory. Dopamine was the chemical reward for victorious friction. The entertainment industry has short-circuited this mechanism. They have created holographic victory simulators. When the slave spends hours leveling up in a video game or discussing sports statistics, his primitive brain does not distinguish between pixels and inertial reality. The brain secretes industrial amounts of dopamine, chemically convincing him he has achieved something great. The individual feels satisfied, even though his bank account is anemic and his empire does not exist. The lethal operator diagnoses entertainment as the analgesic of the failed. The pain of insignificance is holy. It is the biological indicator that warns you lack gravitational mass. It is the tactical compass pointing toward hyperdensity. When you consume entertainment, you ingest an analgesic that numbs that vital pain. To erect the crystal prison, you must apply entertainment asphyxiation. You strictly forbid yourself from numbing the pain. The repudiation of cheap fire, closing the matrix boilers. The 3D ecosystem is cold, dark, and hostile to those lacking immaterial weight. The biomass, scared by the absolute zero of the vacuum, desperately seeks external heat. Entertainment is the cheap fire around which thermal beggars gather. Commercial music, movies, and social media are bonfires designed for superficial heat. They generate convective friction in your chest that makes you feel alive, but that fire does not belong to you. You are not the owner of the wood or the flame. You are a vagabond consuming the thermal radiation of corporations. The veto on lightness demands absolute repudiation of this fire of dross. You must extinguish it. The walking corpse puts out the fires of his environment. You disconnect from popular culture. You become lethargically ignorant of movie releases, sports idols, and algorithmic trends. You understand that consuming the packaged emotions of the Matrix is an act of psychological prostitution. You are renting out your nervous system. By closing the external boilers, the cold of your own stasis will invade you. Without constant background noise, the silence of your mind will become deafening. You embrace that cold. You refuse to warm yourself with the system's wood. Any fire you feel will be the nuclear radiation generated by the collision of your own goals. The assimilation of geological boredom, the Titan's stasis. Human biomass has a pathological terror of boredom. In the millisecond they lack a task or a stimulus. Their hands tremble seeking a mobile device. They feel panic at the vacuum of their own consciousness. When the outside noise stops, they are forced to hear the dismal echo of their own irrelevance. They flee from themselves. For the operator who has collimated his laser, boredom is not a threat. It is the empirical metric that mass accumulation is working. You instate the doctrine of geological boredom. You must learn to sit in a chair and exist without doing anything to entertain yourself. No music, no screens, no fiction books, just your weight. Iridium mountains do not seek fun. Supermassive black holes do not seek fresh stimuli. Boredom is the natural state of high-gravity cosmic entities. When you accept the lethargy of non-stimulation, your nervous system resets. Dopamine receptors, previously calcined by the egregore, begin to heal and become hypersensitive. In the abyssal stillness of geological boredom, the simplest act of corporate planning will acquire a voltage the entertainment-addicted mind could never conceive. Boredom is the incubation chamber of tyranny. It is where your internal gravity hardens. You must cultivate this sterile field to harvest the density of absolute power. The hedonic fast, castrating the reward circuit. Eradicating entertainment is not achieved through good intentions. It requires a brutal detoxification protocol. You must subject your biology to the hedonic fast. The biological body has fat reserves to survive starvation. The human mind has neuroplasticity reserves to survive the starvation of stimuli. You must use them. When you cut the supply of cheap dopamine, amputating access to video games, social networks, and streaming, you will experience withdrawal syndrome. Your inferior biology will scream. You will feel irritability and brain fog. The slave succumbs here, convinced that relaxation is necessary for his well-being. He fails. You, armored in operative absolute zero, observe your withdrawal with the clinical indifference of a scientist studying a virus in a petri dish. You castrate the reward circuit. You refuse to yield. You pass through the fire of abstinence without blinking, allowing your brain's neurochemistry to collapse and restructure itself. After weeks of this relentless fast, the biological need to be entertained dies of starvation. You discover with the Creator's geometric coldness that entertainment was not a fundamental human need, but a chemical shackle. The system implanted it to ensure your energy surplus never became a threat to its monopolies. The tyranny of dissatisfaction, hunger as an inertial engine. Entertainment is designed to keep the biomass in a state of precarious satisfaction. If the slave laughs with a comedy on Sunday, he returns to the assembly line on Monday with enough docility to endure another week of servitude. Cheap satisfaction is the lubricant of the matrix gears. You must remove all lubricant. The lethal operator extracts all lubricant from his ecosystem. By applying leisure asphyxiation, he instates the tyranny of dissatisfaction. Since you have no escape routes and have welded your boiler valves shut, the inertial pain of your unrealized ambition becomes sharp. You are chronically dissatisfied. This is the design. You do not try to be happy or find balance. Happiness is the lukewarm temperature of stagnant waters. You cultivate dissatisfaction as a weapon of mass destruction. You turn the absence of fun into an atavistic inertial hunger. Your mind is forced to devour 3D matter simply to obtain a minimum degree of movement. The hydraulic dam, lacking relief, pushes the only gate you left open, the gate of hyper-dense work, conquest, and expropriation of enemy capital. Pure dissatisfaction, undiluted by entertainment, will inevitably transmute into the financial or territorial collapse of your sector, for your psyche will have no other metric of relief. The battery recharge fraud, digital inactivity fatigue. The slave uses a mistaken thermodynamic metaphor to justify entertainment. I need to recharge my batteries. They believe that staring at a TV screen or sliding fingers over a device for hours is a state of rest that replenishes voltage. Subject leisure to the metric of electrical consumption. It is a massive load. The visual processing of fiction and the emotional alteration of narrative recharge nothing. They are a heavy cognitive burden. Your brain is burning ATP, processing millions of pixels. When the slave finishes his rest session, his immaterial battery is deeply drained. They feel apathetic and heavy. They lack the will to power. The monarch repudiates the fraud of digital rest. The only valid rest in the VETO on lightness architecture is the total cessation of data processing. If you need to recharge your core, you do not consume lightness. You sleep in a deep lethargy like a biological corpse, or you sit in the darkness practicing soundless immobility. Anything that is not deep sleep, abyssal silence, or inertial meditation is a covert energy hemorrhage. By ceasing to exhaust your brain with leisure, the voltage surplus you accumulate day after day reaches critical levels. This endows you with a tactical endurance that will crush any competitor who wastes his nights unwinding. The arid ecosystem designing the obsidian desert. Entertainment asphyxiation cannot be sustained solely through willpower. Will is a thermal barrier that eventually yields to fatigue. You must materialize this asphyxiation in your physical environment. You must transmute your home and corporate operations chamber into an arid ecosystem. You must be ruthless. Audit your 3D coordinates with an inquisitor's cruelty. Identify every device and piece of furniture designed to facilitate thermal dissipation of leisure. Televisions, victory simulation consoles, and fiction novels must be expropriated from your site. Create an obsidian desert. Your environment must reflect your mission's hostility. A desk, an ergonomic iridium chair, pure data processing tools, and the sepulchral silence of conquest. If there is no water in the desert, the beast cannot drink. If there are no entertainment tools, the neurological impulse to seek easy dopamine hits a physical wall. By sterilizing the ground, you guarantee only conquest survives. Friction conversion, ballistic violence on the target. Physics demands that energy not be destroyed, but transformed. When you have closed all escape valves and supported geological boredom, you possess a critical mass of static energy. If this energy is not directed toward the matrix, it will destroy you from within. The final stage is friction conversion. Friction. Take all the agitation, dopamine hunger, and inertial dissatisfaction and collimate them through the iridium lens directly onto your focal point of conquest. The transformation is terrifying for the 3D competition. That immense atmospheric pressure becomes ballistic violence. Hard work becomes your only source of relief. The ability to devour legal treaties or design financial architectures is no longer a chore. It is the only relief for your psyche. You work with a cold, mechanical, and tireless fury. You destroy market defenses because applying crushing force is the only way your brain gets a reward. You have weaponized deprivation. Iridium asceticism, the monarch who does not smile at jesters. As your empire crystallizes under the oppressive lethargy of your doctrine, the biomass will observe you from the barrier of their own boiling. They will look with envy and biological pity. They will say you have no life. They will say you are a machine. They will try to send you their memes to break your stasis. Your response must be iridium asceticism. The unalterable monarch, anchored on his osmium throne, does not observe the court jesters. You are not offended by their criticism, but you do not yield. You look with the iridium eye, understanding that the slave's idea of enjoying life is numbing themselves against slavery. You have chosen a path of geometric purity incomprehensible to the mammal. You do not need the warmth of their comedy because you do not feel cold. Your tactical immobility and refusal to consume the world's lightness are the master walls of your invulnerability. You have elevated yourself above the need to be stimulated, the titan of atmospheric pressure. Look at yourself in the brutal aridity of your own sterilized ecosystem, having welded the escape valves through which humanity's inertia bled out. You managed to suffocate leisure's escape valve. You understood entertainment was the sabotage preventing your boiler from reaching the pressure needed to demolish the matrix. You mutilated the egregor's cheap fire, closing the ovens of popular culture to submerge yourself in gelida independence. You executed the assimilation of geological boredom, staring into the vacuum until your receptors healed. You passed through the hedonic fast, castrating the reward circuit so stimulation needs died. You instated the tyranny of dissatisfaction, weaponizing the pain of lack of movement into the hunger that devours the market. You murdered the battery recharge fraud and erected the arid ecosystem. You executed friction conversion, directing your tension toward your empire with ballistic violence. Stay absolute, stay heavy. Chapter 5. The Stasis of Novelty, Punishing the Fresh Stimulus. The biology of surprise, the evolutionary defect of the wandering mind. To establish the veto on lightness and seal the fissures where your mental voltage escapes, the lethal operator must subject the neurobiology of wonder to forensic dissection. Human biomass suffers from a systemic disease encoded in its own DNA, the addiction to novelty. In the Pleistocene, mammalian survival depended on exploration. Finding new territory or detecting an unusual movement in the brush guaranteed life. The brain, to incentivize this constant exploration, developed a chemical reward mechanism. Every time the organism experiences a fresh or novel stimulus, the ventral tegmental area secretes a squirt of dopamine. This kept the primitive monkey moving. In the prehistoric jungle, this mechanism saved lives. In the three-dimensional ashboard, where the goal is not survival but collapsing matter and expropriating power, this mechanism is a lethal structural defect. The control system, the egregor, knows this biological flaw and weaponizes it against you. It injects novelty intravenously. It injects new news, new market trends, new technologies, and new crises. Your reptile brain, deceived by evolutionary programming, diverts its gaze toward the shiny object, abandons the trench of its current work, and runs to investigate. It feels an artificial chemical pleasure, but by doing so it has broken its laser's collimation. The slave spends his life chasing the ephemeral glow of novelty, never achieving the inertial depth necessary to crystallize an empire. He has withdrawn atmospheric pressure from the target. Each distraction is a leak of potential energy that prevents the consolidation of the hyperdense core needed to warp the local space-time fabric. The fraud of the good idea, sabotage disguised as genius. The most perverse and destructive manifestation of novelty addiction does not come from external screens, but from the individual's own skull. It is the new idea syndrome. The entrepreneur, artist, or 3D builder establishes a mandate, create a monopoly, master a market, or write a work. They begin to execute with initial vigor. After a few days or weeks, the work becomes heavy. Friction appears. Physical reality opposes resistance, the market does not respond immediately, and the initial dopamine evaporates. Just at that moment of thermal fatigue, the slave's brain, desperate for chemical relief, generates a good idea, a new project or a different strategy. Inferior biology leaps for joy. They feel they have had a revelation of genius. They abandon the original project and throw themselves toward the new mandate with feverish enthusiasm. Apply the scalpel of collapse physics. That good idea is an atrocious fraud. It is not a revelation of genius. It is a thermal evasion mechanism. The brain offers you a new idea simply because the new thing does not have friction yet. The new project exists only in the vacuum of your imagination, where there is no competition, no rejection, and no thermodynamic laws to wear it down. The lethal operator diagnoses the parallel good idea as an internal sabotage attempt. By jumping toward novelty, the individual has guaranteed that none of his initiatives will ever accumulate the gravity necessary to alter the universe. He remains a gaseous entity, always starting and never finishing, dissipating his mass in a series of aborted beginnings that the egregore consumes to maintain the simulation's inertia. The thermodynamics of monotony, the inertial drill. The physics of material penetration establishes an unshakable principle. For an object to pierce a high-density barrier, like a steel plate or a financial market wall, kinetic force must be applied uninterruptedly upon a single geometric point. If you apply pressure on 1 millimeter and then get bored, you will fail to pierce. If you apply pressure on adjacent millimeters, you will end up with a slightly scratched but intact steel plate and with your own tools worn down by friction. Material greatness is hidden in the violence of sustained monotony. You must instate the thermodynamics of the inertial drill. The stasis of novelty demands repetition. It demands you chain yourself to the repetitive, deaf, oppressive, and mathematically boring execution of your main mandate. Once you have fixed the collimated laser on an expropriation coordinate, you forbid yourself from altering the vector. You do the same on Monday, Tuesday, the following month, and the following year. The biomass flees from repetition because repetition does not produce dopamine. The hyperdense creator embraces repetition because he understands that hitting the same square millimeter of the universe 1,000,000 consecutive times is the only geometry capable of fracturing the space-time barrier. Your monotony becomes an iridium drill. While the competition changes strategy trying to be innovative, you keep drilling the same well with the suffocating lethargy of a geological automaton until the crust of reality breaks and wealth, power, or submission gush forth. You win not by being different every day, but by being the same unalterable force until matter yields. The punishment of fresh stimulus, the repudiation protocol. To subject the nervous system to this stasis of novelty, biological willpower is insufficient, as will is a finite resource that gets exhausted. You must implement a paramilitary operant conditioning, the punishment of fresh stimulus. When you are in your vacuum chamber, focused on your mandate, the brain will experience spasms. It will beg you to look at a new market trend. It will whisper to read a new book that will revolutionize your vision. It will plead with you to minimally alter your empire's design to make it more exciting. When this biological spasm occurs, you must punish it. The punishment is not physical, it is inertial. In the millisecond you detect the thirst for novelty, you force yourself to dive even deeper into the boring and monotonous task you were trying to evade. If your brain asks to change strategy because it is bored of waiting, you force yourself to audit the same dry numbers for 2 additional hours. You apply draconian rigor. You communicate to your nervous system through physical action that the request for novelty will be penalized with a double dose of monotony. By suffocating the dopamine reward and responding with an increase in static pressure, the reptile brain learns to submit. It understands that, under the operator's skull, novelty is poison. The brain understands that the only way to obtain relief is through the absolute completion of the current wave function collapse. You have tamed the hungry beast by refusing to feed it with the cheap fire of distraction. You convert the biological impulse for change into a reinforcement of your own unshakable and deaf persistence. The atrophy of enthusiasm, the executioner's coldness. The culture of 3D weakness venerates the passionate figure. They believe that to have massive success in the matrix, you must feel a fire in your chest, an unshakable enthusiasm for what you do. They demand that you smile, that you love the process, and that you jump out of bed motivated by the morning light. It is a lie. Subject enthusiasm to fluid physics. Enthusiasm is a hot gas. It is an emotion, and like every emotion in the biological universe, it is subject to the law of impermanence. Enthusiasm evaporates. Whoever builds his empire based on motivation and enthusiasm is building a fortress on a tectonic plate of gelatin. The VETO on lightness demands the atrophy of enthusiasm. The creator who has adopted the stasis of novelty does not operate with passion. He operates with the aseptic and bored coldness of an executioner carrying out a judicial sentence. The executioner does not hate the condemned, nor is he enthusiastic about pulling the lever. It is mechanical work. In the same way, you execute your plan of territorial domination or financial accumulation without shedding a single drop of emotion. You do not need to be motivated to push the hydraulic dam. You do it by simple paramilitary inertia. By extirpating the need for enthusiasm, you become invulnerable to moods. It matters not if you are deeply depressed or clinically euphoric. Your carbon body will execute the mandate with the same robotic and oppressive cadence. The execution has been disconnected from the emotional system and connected directly to the inorganic laws of thermodynamics. You are an engine that runs on ice, not on fleeting sparks. The murder of the corporate pivot, repudiating tactical cowardice. In the modern lexicon of the crystal economy, the system has invented a word to justify surrendering to friction, the pivot or pivoting. Weak corporations and liquid entrepreneurs, upon hitting market resistance, decide to pivot, radically change their business model under the excuse of being agile and resilient. For the lethal operator, the corporate pivot, in 99% of cases, is the commercial name for cowardice. It is the leadership's inability to sustain the iridium gaze against the steel barrier. By pivoting, they renounce the atmospheric pressure they had accumulated and seek a new space free of friction. By doing so, the 3D ecosystem breathes a sigh of relief because the threat has changed direction. In the stasis of novelty, the pivot is outlawed. You do not change direction because the terrain becomes rocky. You force the terrain to pulverize under your boots. If the market rejects your directive, you do not alter the directive. You increase the gravitational mass of the attack. You redouble your immobility. You maintain pressure on the exact same point, with a sociopathic disregard for your own organization's pain. The competition changes course, expecting to find the easy route. You march in a straight line through the minefield until you cross it. By demonstrating that your tolerance for monotony and friction is infinitely superior to the environment's capacity to resist you, you break the matrix's will. The pivot is for fluids. The unalterable monolith does not bend, it pierces through. You win because you are the only one who refuses to acknowledge the barrier. The terror of closing, why the biomass loves to start. The psychological root of novelty addiction is the terror of closing. Humanity is addicted to starting things. They buy domains, open corporations, write first chapters, and design master plans. The act of initiating is impregnated with dopamine because it is saturated with infinite possibilities and lacks the gravity of facts. However, as a project moves toward completion, the quantum probability cloud begins to collapse. Infinite possibilities are reduced to a single physical reality. And physical reality always implies the judgment of the material universe. Finishing something means exposing it to the scale of absolute failure or success. The slave, terrified at the prospect of being weighed and found wanting in density, sabotages the closure. Weeks before concluding a mandate, they get bored and start a new project, seeking refuge again in the warmth of infinite possibility and fleeing from the lethal cold of finite reality. They hide in the next big thing. The crystal prison demands you annihilate the pleasure of beginnings and fall in love with the brutal closure. You do not allow yourself to open a new code window or a new line of expansion without having expropriated every last drop of inertial blood from the current project. You close the thermal loop. You finish what you started. You force your mind to experience the maximum friction of the last millimeters, where the universe's resistance is greatest. By forcing yourself to finish the boring task to its last geometric consequences, you acquire the cosmic reputation of the wave collapser, an entity that never leaves matter in a state of suspension. Blindness to trivial innovation, contempt for trends. The three-dimensional civilization breathes the oxygen of innovation. The market vomits new tools, new AI algorithms, and new technological architectures every lunar cycle. The matrix demands that you stay updated under the threat of obsolescence. This is the trap of the gas of existence. It is a drain on your focus. To be constantly updated means ceding your bandwidth to the engineering of chaos. The operator executes blindness to trivial innovation. You evaluate new tools not by their shine, but by their ballistic density. Most technological or social innovation does not alter the fundamentals of power. They are mere cosmetic filters. They are filters over the same biological laws of fear and greed. You chain yourself to monolithic fundamentals, pure strategy, deft execution, the immovable geometry of the supply and demand of submission. If a new technology promises you thermal shortcuts to elude dense work, you repudiate it. You stay with your tungsten tool. You become lethargically ignorant of trends. This voluntary ignorance shields you against mental obsolescence. While your competitors spend half their fiscal year learning to use the latest useless tool, you have invested that same time hitting the same obsidian wall with the same force, achieving a structural breakthrough. The fossilization of the mandate, the inertial point of no return. The final goal of imposing the stasis of novelty on your nervous system is to reach the thermodynamic phenomenon of the fossilization of the mandate. In initial stages, maintaining focus on a single point requires a massive expenditure of repressive energy. You must build mental barricades to contain your novelty-addicted biology. But if you sustain the punishment of fresh stimulus, tactical blindness, and ballistic boredom long enough, your brain's plasticity begins to harden. Neuronal pathways of distraction and novelty-seeking suffer ischemic atrophy from lack of blood flow. Eventually, you cross the inertial point of no return. You are changed. Your directive, your goal of domination, and your paramilitary monotony fossilize in the very structure of your cerebral cortex. They cease to be an effort and become your resting frequency. In this altered state of consciousness, the act of trying to distract yourself would become painful and unnatural. You are the monolith. In the fossilization of the mandate, you no longer need to discipline yourself. Discipline has died because indiscipline has ceased to be a mathematical option in your source code. You are an organic machine calibrated to process a single variable, chewing through space-time in a single direction. You are immune to sirens, the titan of geological boredom. Look at yourself in the sterile desolation of your own consistency, having mutilated the curiosity gene that condemned the slave to insignificance. You managed to suffocate the biology of surprise. You understood that the dopamine of the new was a gas syringe that diluted your mass, and you refused to pursue the glow. You gutted the fraud of the good idea, diagnosing it as the sabotage of the reptile fleeing from friction. You instated the thermodynamics of monotony, transmuting your boredom into an iridium drill capable of fracturing the matrix's fabric through sustained blows. You executed the punishment of fresh stimulus. You penalized your own nervous system with the overdose of deaf routine whenever it pleaded for chemical relief. You permitted the atrophy of enthusiasm, assuming labor with the psychopathic coldness of the executioner. You murdered the cowardice of the pivot, crossing the minefields of the economy in a straight line. You conquered the terror of closing, forcing the wave function to brutally collapse into material reality, assuming blindness to trivial innovation to not dissipate bandwidth. And finally, you reached the fossilization of the mandate. Novelty has evaporated. You are the titan of geological boredom. Stay constant. Stay heavy. Chapter 6. The Cognitive Black Hole, Suction and Annihilation of the Environment. The Physics of Singularity, Death of Volume, Triumph of Mass. Up to this point in the architecture of the VETO on lightness, you have operated under doctrines of isolation. You have raised the sensory guillotine and built the containment dike. This is defensive tactics. It is the survival of the creator. But absolute domination is not sustained eternally on the defensive. Every shield, regardless of its iridium thickness, eventually suffers material fatigue if bombarded uninterruptedly by matrix chaos. For attention to become invulnerable, it must transmute from a passive wall to an active, inescapable force. Subject your mind to the astrophysics of stellar collapse. It is a violent transformation. When a supermassive star exhausts its fuel, the pressure pushing outward ceases, and gravity collapses the core with indescribable violence. Matter is compressed until atoms break. Volume reduces to zero, but inertial mass remains intact. The result is a gravitational singularity, a black hole, an obscenely dense region. The lethal operator replicates this collapse in his own cognition. Instead of using energy to push external stimuli away, you stop pushing. You allow your attention to collapse upon itself, upon a single coordinate. Your focus becomes so dense and heavy that you acquire the suction force of the abyss. You devour the surroundings. Phase transition from defense to assimilation. The individual who merely tries to concentrate sees interruptions as a threat. If the market suffers an abrupt alteration, the slave gets angry. He feels his attentional house of cards has been knocked down. This anger is the confession of his structural fragility. When you cross the threshold, interruption ceases to exist. A black hole does not feel interrupted when an asteroid crosses its path. It simply sucks it in. In this state of absolute concentration, if a problem tries to penetrate your chamber, you do not raise your arms to protect yourself. You withdraw defenses. You allow the problem to fall toward you. You let the gravity do the work. As the problem approaches the central coordinate of your collimated attention, it is subjected to a gravitational field designed to disintegrate it. You absorb the kinetic energy of the crisis and use it to fuel your own inertial rendering machine. The environment feeds you. You have converted chaos into inorganic raw material. The relational event horizon, the perimeter of no return. Every black hole possesses an unmovable mathematical border, the event horizon. It is the point of no return. Any object or information that crosses this line is inexorably trapped by the singularity's gravity, disconnected from the rest of the universe forever. The monarch traces this horizon around his deep concentration. Human biomass is used to interacting in ecosystems where they can enter, throw an opinion, and then withdraw unharmed. When you establish your massive gravity, rules are rewritten with thermodynamic cruelty. You warn your ecosystem through the silent weight of your presence that crossing the line of your focus has lethal costs. If a subordinate or intruder decides to cross the perimeter to bring you drama or an excuse, they cross the relational event horizon. At that exact instant, the intruder's reality warps. You do not respond with words, you respond with atmospheric pressure. You demand the resolution of the problem with a logic that admits no doubt. You force the intruder to mathematically justify every syllable, stripping him of protective emotions. Whoever dares to interrupt your cognitive black hole discovers he has not started a conversation. He has fallen into a quantum shredder. He will emerge exhausted and terrified of ever profaning your silence again. The spaghettification of 3D chaos, shredding the drama. Astrophysics describes a macabre process called spaghettification. When an object falls into a black hole, gravity is so extreme that it is violently stretched into a thread 1 atom thick before being annihilated. The hyperdense creator applies psychological spaghettification on any stimulus that tries to distract him. When the outside world throws a crisis at you, the biomass delivers it wrapped in a thick layer of emotional drama and biological narrative. It is a compact object of hysteria. By drawing that crisis toward your unbribable focus, your atrocious gravity begins to pull at it. You stretch the problem. You rip the emotion away. You violently separate the thermal narrative from the inorganic data. Emotion is disintegrated in the void. The threat, which seemed gigantic to the slaves, is spaghettified into a tiny, aseptic mathematical line, a thread of raw data. That thread is the only thing that reaches the singularity of your mind. You resolve in silence. Gravitational lens, warping the competition's light. General relativity shows us that black holes do not just swallow matter, they also warp space-time so that light from other galaxies bends. This is called gravitational lensing. The image of reality behind the black hole arrives completely distorted. When you reach this state, you produce a lens effect over your sector. Because your concentration is so dense, and because you refuse to react or disclose information, the competition cannot perceive reality objectively when they look toward your territory. Your silence bends the perception of others. Your competitors watch you trying to guess your moves. They begin to overestimate your power. They begin to attribute master strategies to you that you are not even executing. Your immobility creates an optical illusion of massive omnipotence. They adjust their strategies and retreat from markets, fleeing from an aggression you never launched. You win the war by warping the chessboard simply because you weigh too much. Rendering in the dark, data processing without a screen. The slave brain demands to see progress in real time. They need indicators that they are advancing. It is like trying to process a monumental visual project while rendering every frame continuously on the screen. The machine saturates and the timeline freezes. The cognitive singularity operates under rendering in the dark. In the depths of the black hole, light cannot escape. No one sees what happens inside, not even you. By assimilating the veto on lightness, you stop monitoring your own progress every 10 minutes. You enter raw data into your mind, press the mandate for inertial execution, and turn off the internal monitor. You allow the void. You allow your single-thread concentration to shred the gigabytes of 3D reality in the most absolute soundless blackness. There is no friction of review. The inertial compression engine of your mind works at 0 degrees Kelvin. When the singularity spits the result, it is not a draft. It is the final file in maximum resolution. Information paradox, the repudiation of thermal emission. In black hole physics, Hawking radiation suggests that black holes evaporate, losing mass over time. The monarch cannot afford Hawking evaporation. You must instate the repudiation of thermal emission. The weak individual, when concentrated on a work, feels the biological need to tell the tribe. This is a fatal leak. They need updates and applause. That communication is the radiation that evaporates their black hole. By talking about your project before it has solidified, your gravity escapes. Within your obsidian perimeter, you must absorb all industry secrets and process all knowledge, but you strictly forbid emitting a single vowel. You are a one-way information vault. Only entry is allowed. The exit is welded shut. This paramilitary retention of information generates incalculable density. Since you emit no radiation, the enemy has no telemetric tools to measure your size. This ensures that any attempt at an attack is a statistical suicide for them. Extreme time dilation, eternity on the execution line. The closer you get to a singularity's core, the more the flow of time alters. When the veto on lightness reaches atomic perfection, and you penetrate the deepest layer of the cognitive black hole, you invert this law to subdue the competition. You experience extreme time dilation. Within your single-thread flow, time warps. What takes your adversaries 6 biological months of meetings and distractions, you process and execute in the stasis of a single-day cycle. Your inertial core operates in a dimension where seconds expand, giving you space to calculate destruction with precision. While executives sweat to meet goals, you sit inside the singularity. A single blink of yours equals months of 3D effort by the herd. You win the arms race because you inhabit a physical space where the hands of the clock have been crushed by the weight of your own focused attention. You outpace the simulation by refusing to move at its frantic and superficial rhythm. You are the owner of time. Expropriation of escape velocity. Submitting others' will. The most perverse level of domination through absolute concentration is what you do to the will of those orbiting your empire. In astrophysics, if a planet gets too close to a dense star, it loses its escape velocity. It no longer has the kinetic energy to break free. Its fate is permanently linked to the singularity. In corporate architecture, your unshakable focus expropriates the escape velocity of your environment. Subordinates and partners clash with the immensity of your purpose. You do not doubt. Your consistency is so solid and void of lightness that weaker wills simply yield their inertia to yours. They have no choice but to follow. People around you subconsciously renounce their personal agendas because maintaining a parallel project in your proximity requires energy their biology cannot sustain. They end up orbiting you. They execute your directives without you raising your voice, pushed by the physical determinism of mass. You own their free will. Contempt for empty space, the final collapse. The culmination of stasis in the cognitive black hole is absolute contempt for empty space. The biomass needs room to breathe and free time to play. That is the nature of gases. They seek to expand to reduce pressure. You have dictated the end of gaseous expansion. You have eradicated the leaks. You have sealed the vault. By having nowhere to expand, and by not allowing distraction, all that immaterial immensity collapses into a single mathematical point in your skull. You do not fear the atmospheric pressure this generates. You feed on it. Every attempt by the universe to introduce noise is devoured. Your mind is the end of the line for stimuli. The supermassive core, Look at yourself in the soundless blackness of your own hyperdensity, having decapitated reactive defense to assume the cruelty of cosmic assimilation. You manage to suffocate the physics of dispersion, transmuting your consciousness through the physics of singularity to absorb the matter of the ashboard. You are the center. You mutilated anger against interruptions, executing the phase transition to devour problems instead of repelling them. You trace the relational event horizon, educating the ecosystem with inertial terror. You executed the spaghettification of 3D chaos, reducing human panic to simple threads of raw aseptic data. You deployed the gravitational lens, warping the perception of competitors through your deaf immobility. You assumed rendering in the dark, exporting success in a single unalterable collapse. You instated the information paradox and handled extreme time dilation to resolve architectures in a geological blink. Stay heavy. Chapter 7. The Veto on Opinion. Blindness to Social Friction. The physics of aerodynamic resistance, the drag coefficient. For the veto on lightness to culminate in the total invulnerability of your empire, you must subject the structure of your thoughts to the laws of fluid dynamics. In physics, when an object moves through a medium, it experiences a force of resistance. This aerodynamic resistance is determined by the object's frontal surface. A parachute, by being fully open and exposing an immense surface, captures all the wind and violently slows the fall. A tungsten needle, lacking a frontal surface, pierces through the same wind without registering resistance, keeping its kinetic energy intact. Human society is a dense, chaotic, and highly reactive fluid. It is a hurricane of moral debates, political crises, collective indignation, and cultural dramas. Opinion is the frontal surface of your mind. Every time you formulate an opinion on a subject you do not control, you are opening a parachute. You are increasing your drag coefficient. You are offering the wind a surface where friction hits. The biological slave lives with 1,000 open parachutes. They have a stance on every event that occurs on the ashboard. They want to be heard. They want to participate in the conversation. As a result of their aerodynamic surface, they are stopped dead, paralyzed by the resistance of a world that crashes against their stances. The extortion of civic duty, the fraud of being informed. The parasitic system does not allow the slave to be a blank canvas. To keep the world's thermal friction high and ensure the biomass dissipates its energy, the Matrix has invented the fraud of civic duty and social responsibility. The system indoctrinates you from childhood to feel you have a moral obligation to have a stance. They demand that you position yourself, left or right, for or against, victim or executioner. They tell you that if you are not informed and have no opinion, you are ignorant or a sociopath. Subject this extortion to iridium dissection. What use is it to an architect building a monopoly to have an opinion on a distant conflict? It is of no use. His opinion is not an act of power. It is an act of servitude. It is the payment of an attentional toll to the customs of mediocrity. The hyperdense creator diagnoses the need to be informed as a heat extraction mechanism. You refuse to pay. You execute the veto on opinion. Your selective ignorance is a shield. The thermodynamics of indignation, the useless combustion. The immediate consequence of having an opinion is susceptibility to indignation. When your opinion crashes against the opposite opinion of another individual, an inelastic collision occurs. Indignation is the scorching heat released in that shock. Observe the biomass in its digital habitat. Their amygdalae become inflamed. Their heart rates accelerate. Their fingers type furiously, trying to defend their point. They secrete cortisol and adrenaline. For hours, their mind is hijacked by anger toward a holographic enemy. Indignation is the most useless thermodynamic combustion of the 3D universe. You are burning glucose and time to heat the air. The operator repudiates indignation. If an event does not directly threaten your capital flow or your sovereignty, you forbid yourself from reacting thermally. You are lethargically blind to offense. By eradicating opinions on how the world should work, you eliminate the oxygen that feeds the fire. You remain at absolute zero. The ideological toll and the tribe, the blackmail of empathy. Amputating your opinions will generate immediate hostility from your biological environment. The tribe survives based on ideological cohesion. When individuals in your corporation gather to complain or debate, they will try to drag you into their gravitational pit. They will ask you, "What do you think about this?" That is the ideological toll. They are measuring your temperature to ensure you vibrate at their frequency of hysteria. If you issue a stance, you have ceded your sovereignty. You have opened a parachute. The execution of the veto on lightness demands that you punish this blackmail with the iridium gaze. When the herd demands an opinion, you observe them with sociopathic lethargy. You respond with the vacuum. "I have no opinion on the matter." Or, "That matter does not concern me." The biomass cannot process this. Ideological silence terrifies them. Your lack of indignation is a threat because you do not obey their empathy laws. The murder of debate, the repudiation of persuasion. One of the gravest mental diseases of the aspirant to power is the need to convince others. The weak human needs the tribe to validate his vision. If they have a business idea or a philosophy, they feel the impulse to debate it. Subject persuasion to inertial physics. Debate is a tool for slaves. Debating implies you recognize the other as your tactical equal and grant their mind jurisdictional authority to validate your truth. Debate generates dreadful convective friction, arguing and defending. It is the waste of kinetic energy in an abstract battlefield. The hyperdense creator executes the murder of debate. The monolith does not convince, it crushes. If you have a mandate, you forbid yourself from discussing it with the ecosystem. You do not try to persuade competitors that your model is superior. You collapse the wave function in absolute geological silence. When the world realizes what you have done, the matter has crystallized. The fallacy of moral authority, the drag of being right. The human ego has a poisonous addiction to the concept of being right. They want to possess moral authority. This binary architecture is a holographic construction of the control system to keep the biomass entertained in ethical battles. Being right is an aerodynamic drag. If you cling to your truth, you are predictable. Your enemies will know where to attack you because they will know your moral code. Furthermore, the material universe is amoral. Gravity makes no ethical distinctions when it brings down a plane. To operate as the tungsten needle, you must amputate the fallacy of moral authority. The veto on opinion implies vetoing your own goodness. You shed the need to justify your actions before the tribunal of history. By abandoning the heavy armor of being right, you become infinitely light in your tactics. You can operate in gray areas and stifle your competition without moral remorse. Superiority is demonstrated by expropriating the resources of those busy debating. Mental inventory purge, freeing the processor. The mind is a processor with finite RAM. Every opinion you harbor about the state of the world or the private lives of public figures occupies a memory block. You have to invest metabolic energy to keep those stances updated. It is a dead inventory that pays an expensive rent in your skull. You must execute a purge. Subject your psyche to forced eviction. You enter your mind's files and relentlessly delete all folders that do not contain direct instructions for domination. What do I think about the tax system? Deleted. What do I think about the latest scandal? Format total. What do I think about others' opinions of me? Total deletion. By eliminating these junk data blocks, you free an obscene percentage of your neurological processor. Your analytical calculation capacity skyrockets. The voltage you use to sustain useless stances is redirected toward the collimated laser. Your mind, void of ideologies, becomes a sterilized white room of pure math. Blindness to deformation, the acoustics of invulnerability. As your cognitive black hole increases its mass and your crystal prison warps your industry, the world will react. The matrix, threatened by an organism that does not obey its thermal laws, will try to destroy you using social friction, deformation. Your competitors and the guardians of the system will launch toxic opinions. They will attack you in the holographic public square. They will try to ruin your reputation. They will expect you, wounded in your ego, to defend yourself and generate friction. They want to force you to open your parachute. The veto on opinion is your definitive armor. You are psychopathically blind to opinions about you. When the wave of defamation hits your perimeter, you do not move a single muscle. You do not issue responses. You do not defend yourself because you know the words of the weak lack mass. Wind cannot knock down a titanium monolith. The attack evaporates in the vacuum of your indifference, and society watches terrified. The spectator in the gas chamber, contemplating others' fire. The maximum expression of the veto on opinion is the ability to become an inert spectator in the midst of total chaos. When collective hysteria breaks out in your corporation or market, the biomass drowns in the gas of its own anxiety. Everyone runs demanding that stances be taken and opinions be given. You wrap yourself in your immaterial NBC suit. You are the only organism in the room wearing an oxygen mask. You sit at the vertex of chaos. You watch false leaders and subordinates bleed out discussing who is to blame. You look through the glass of your stasis. You do not intervene. You are an entomologist with a magnifying glass. This sadistic retention of your voice is thermodynamic conservation. While they burn their last millivolts trying to impose opinions on the smoke, you keep your batteries at 100%. When the gas dissipates and the biomass lies exhausted, you rise from the throne and expropriate. The market remains without resistance. The zero friction profile, the tungsten needle in the wind. The ballistic objective of amputating your moral, political, and social stances is the physical alteration of your mental geometry. You have eliminated the frontal surface. You have closed all the parachutes the system forced you to open. You have achieved the zero friction profile. Your mind is now a hyper-dense needle. In this structural state, material reality is experienced in a terrifying and sublime way. You advance through the corridors of power, and the wind of the human ecosystem simply parts at your step. Others' conflicts slide off your surface. World opinions flow around you without pushing you a single micrometer off your trajectory. You do not try to change the world with your words. The world is gaseous dross that does not deserve the effort of your persuasion. You alter the world through the simple and non-negotiable occupation of space. You are a mass that does not reflect, does not argue, and does not yield. You are the final constant, the reflectionless monarch. Look at yourself in the gelida sterility of your own ideological vacuum. Having extirpated the anchor of opinions, you manage to suffocate the physics of aerodynamic resistance. You closed the parachutes of your biological ego. You mutilated the extortion of civic duty, assuming tactical ignorance as the supreme shield. You executed the thermodynamics of indignation, reserving your inertial heat for mechanical execution. You faced the ideological toll of the tribe, repudiating the blackmail of empathy. You murdered the biological need for debate, understanding that persuasion is for the weak and that the monolith simply collapses probability. You purified your mental inventory, redirecting all voltage toward the laser of expropriation. You developed a sociopathic blindness to defamation, letting the missiles of criticism crash against the acoustic vacuum of your indifference. Opinion has died on your lips. Social friction has lost its jurisdiction over you. You are the reflectionless monarch, the zero-friction projectile. The seventh vault of the veto on lightness has been sealed, and you have reached the perfect aerodynamics of aseptic cruelty. You are ready to murder the myth of oscillation and subject your own body to the unquestionable tyranny of the single thread. Chapter 8. The Tyranny of the Single Thread, Murdering the Myth of Oscillation. The physics of the neuronal pendulum, the atomic cost of changing vectors. For the veto on lightness to acquire the destructive mass of a black hole, you must subject the arrogance of the modern mind to the strict laws of classical mechanics. The 3D ecosystem has infected the biomass with one of the most toxic corporate and social lies in history, the glorification of multitasking. Slaves take pride in juggling. They boast about answering emails, negotiating contracts, planning their future, and consuming entertainment simultaneously. Apply the rigor of physics to this behavior. Newton's second law establishes that force equals mass times acceleration, F-ma. For an object with mass to change direction, an external force is required first. This force must first annul its current inertia and then accelerate it in the new vector. If a pendulum moves to the right, It cannot move to the left without first stopping completely at the inflection point, losing all its kinetic energy in the process. The human brain, when pursuing a goal, builds a neuronal inertia. When you attempt multitasking, what you are truly doing is forcing your brain to behave like a hysterical pendulum. You are ordering your inertial machinery to travel toward a financial project, right, stopping it violently and forcing it to travel toward a trivial conversation, left. This oscillation demands monstrous energy. It requires you to burn industrial amounts of glucose and synaptic voltage simply to brake and restart. You are spending all your motive force on changing direction, and as a result, your net displacement in the geography of power is exactly zero. You are an engine revving in neutral, consuming fuel until the cylinders melt. The thermal tax of context switching, the hemorrhage of cache memory. In computer microprocessor architecture, there is a phenomenon called context switching. When a CPU leaves a processing thread to attend to another, it must save the current state of the first task, empty its cache memory, load the data of the second task, and resume calculation. This process consumes clock cycles and voltage. If you force a CPU to switch contexts too rapidly, the processor spends more time managing the changes than executing the actual code. This collapse is called thrashing. The neurobiology of the inferior matrix suffers from chronic thrashing. When the weak individual stops reading a contract to look at a notification, his brain dumps data. The brain must empty its working memory, neuronal cache. Upon trying to return to the contract 10 seconds later, the brain must reconstruct the entire thought architecture, remember previous clauses, and refocus the lens of attention. The lethal operator diagnoses this process as the thermal tax of context switching. Every time you oscillate, the matrix charges you a tax in the form of convective heat, stress, and exhaustion. This heat destroys the protective myelin layer in your neuronal circuits. Multitasking is not a skill, it is a glorified attention deficit that robs you of your IQ in real time. To rule, you must execute a veto here. You must execute a sociopathic repudiation of this tax. You refuse to pay the thermal quota of the matrix, instating an absolute decree over your cache memory. You protect your concentration as the most valuable asset in the simulator, knowing that every interruption is an act of economic and cognitive sabotage by the egregore. The fraud of the efficient slave, juggling in the slaughterhouse. The control system indoctrinates the biomass so that it confuses movement with progress. They teach you that a slave who moves his hands very fast and attends to 5 phone lines at the same time is an efficient slave. Superficial efficiency is the aesthetic of prey. Clowns juggle. Monarchs wield a siege hammer. When you try to keep 5 balls in the air, your biological brain is paralyzed by the panic that one of them will fall. Your attention is diluted into 5 weak, translucent, and harmless fractions. You may believe you are conquering the world because you are busy, but in reality, you are only stroking the surface of 5 problems. You fail to reach the melting point in any of them. The VETO on lightness demands the murder of superficial efficiency. The hyperdense creator does not juggle. He lets 4 of the balls drop to the ground without the slightest moral or corporate remorse. You watch those secondary tasks crash and burn, and you ignore them. You ignore them with a geological coldness. You take the 5th ball, the primary objective, the coordinate of massive expropriation, and you apply the atrocious totality of your gravity upon it. It is infinitely more destructive for the expansion of your empire to dominate a single cubic millimeter at an atomic level than to be wide. The tyranny of the single thread, the decree of monolithic execution. The tactical response to the disease of oscillation is the instatement of an unshakable doctrine. The tyranny of the single thread. In pure informatics, a single thread process executes one sequence of instructions at a time, from start to finish, blocking any other request from the system until the original task collapses. Transmute this concept to the biology of your brain. When the lethal operator determines the action to be executed, he issues the monolithic decree. During the block of time assigned to that coordinate, the 3D universe is reduced exclusively to that single variable. You strictly forbid yourself from opening a parallel tab. If you are designing the architecture of a monopoly, you forbid yourself from thinking about dinner logistics. If you are auditing a competitor, you forbid yourself from checking social media. The single thread is a geometric prison in which you lock your own consciousness. By denying escape routes, atmospheric pressure increases. The physical reality that stands in your way is subjected to a penetration force so concentrated that the structural barriers of the competition simply disintegrate. The single thread is not a work technique. It is the ballistic tool with which the Creator pierces the world's flesh. It is the end of hesitation and the start of rule. The contempt for in the meantime, the prostitution of attention. The inferior biomass hates the silence and friction of deep execution, so they have invented a thermodynamic aberration they call in the meantime. They eat in the meantime, they watch a screen. They drive in the meantime, they listen to a heated debate. They work on vital projects in the meantime they have the TV on. This behavior is the prostitution of attention. It is handing over fractions of your gravitational mass to secondary parasites to avoid facing the gelido vacuum of stasis. The monarch repudiates the in the meantime. The doctrine of the single thread admits no traveling companions. You must be whole in every second. If you are executing a corporate expropriation, there is no background music. If you sit to ingest nutrients to keep your carbon container operational, you only ingest nutrients, experiencing the insipid and bored mechanics of chewing without anesthetizing your brain with a hologram. You are present or you are nothing. By extirpating the in the meantime, you return to each action its pure inertial weight. You become lethally conscious of every millisecond of your existence. This paramilitary ascesis terrifies the weak ego because, in front of a single task, there are no excuses for failure. But for the cold mind, it is the seal of the reactor. The inertia of the tectonic plate, the unstoppable momentum. When you subject your nervous system to the discipline of the single thread, you experience a phase transition in how your energy interacts with the ashboard. You go from being a reactive fluid to being a tectonic plate. A tectonic plate does not move fast. It does not juggle or oscillate. It moves in one direction. It moves in a single geometric direction at an imperceptible speed, but it possesses trillions of tons of mass. When it hits a continent, it does not bounce. It raises entire mountain ranges. In the first minutes of single-thread execution, the biological brain will resist. But if you maintain the vector, inertia builds. You reach momentum. In this state, muscular effort disappears. Your mind becomes an inertial beast that advances devouring code, numbers, or legal barriers with a deaf and bored violence. Work is no longer an act of will. It is a free fall toward the center of your own gravity. You are now an unstoppable geological process. Punishment for internal interruption, the lobotomy of distraction. The sensory guillotine and the containment dike block the outside world. But the most dangerous enemy of the single thread resides in the synapses of your own skull. Isolated in your vacuum chamber, your mind, desperate for cheap friction, will generate internal interruptions. You will remember an unsent email or debt. The slave stops, notes the idea, and breaks the single thread. They self-sabotage. The lethal operator applies the lobotomy of distraction. When the internal impulse demands you leave the main thread to attend to a mental emergency, you apply the inertial guillotine. You do not note the idea. You do not delegate. You murder it. If that parallel idea was truly worthy of your time's majesty, it will survive the murder and return when the current single thread has been completed. If you forget it forever, it means it was thermodynamic trash created by the reptile to make you lose your cruising speed. You forbid yourself from rewarding mental insubordination. The quantum closure. Sterilization before switching threads. A thread cannot last forever. The project will eventually collapse into reality and the task will end. But the transition between one mandate and the next is the zone of greatest thermal danger. The liquid individual finishes a task and without breathing launches chaotically into the next, dragging the cognitive dust. Cross-contamination destroys the purity of the new vector. The tyranny of the single thread demands the quantum closure. When you complete a mandate, you do not run to the next, you stop. You execute a thermodynamic sterilization, you store data, close files, and allow your brain to return to operative absolute zero. You submerge yourself in vacuity for the time necessary for the cache memory to empty in a controlled way. You wash the scalpel before making the next incision. This gelida pause between threads ensures that the next monolithic decree starts with 100% of your renewed inertia and a pure surgical voltage. The predator's trance, flow as a weapon of mass destruction. When the tyranny of the single thread is sustained through the absolute contempt for oscillation, the psychology of the creator enters a structural resonance known as the predator's trance. The flow state of traditional psychology is a diluted and romanticized version of this trance. Flow is for artists, trance is for gods. The predator's trance is a state of clinical, sociopathic, and highly destructive dissociation. In this state, the biological ego, your identity, your fears, atrophies and disappears. You do not feel hunger, cold, or empathy. You are purely the mathematical incarnation of the task. The processor and the code fuse into one. It is a state that weaponizes lethargy. Your brain works at a sub-base frequency where data processing speed exceeds biological limits because you are not spending any electrons on managing yourself. You have become the iridium scalpel. When you emerge, you experience a deep apathy. There is only the victory. Single focus gravity, crushing the timeline. The final impact of subjecting your life to single-thread execution is not measured in work hours, but in the direct manipulation of space-time. The biomass divides its 24 hours into hundreds of pathetic splinters. Their timeline is wide, but has the depth of an evaporated puddle. You, instead, reject the width. You take all the mass of your biological day and compress it into a single needle. When you direct that needle against the 3D universe, you experience true geometric collapse. You achieve knowledge and destroy competitors at a speed that the biomass diagnoses as genius, but is simply the physical result of the pendulum. The lord of monolithic execution. Look at yourself in the unassailable rigidity of your own vector, having decapitated the myth of oscillation. You managed to suffocate the physics of the neuronal pendulum. You understood multitasking was a biological fraud. You refused to pay the thermal tax of context switching that fried the prefrontal cortex of the herd. You mutilated the fraud of the efficient slave, letting the matrix's juggling balls drop without remorse to concentrate your gravity on the target. You executed the decree of monolithic execution, forcing reality to collapse under your mandate. You assumed tectonic inertia to raise financial mountain ranges with ease. You applied the lobotomy of distraction upon your own internal urgencies, murdering good ideas that tried to deviate you from your cruise speed. In the depth of the vacuum, you experienced the predator's trance, where time disappears and the mind becomes pure passive expropriation force. You are now the master of the thread. Chapter 9. The Obsidian Perimeter, Architecture of Spatial Isolation. The physics of the topological insulator, the unbribable container. For the tyranny of the single thread and the cognitive black hole to be more than poetic illusions that crumble at the first contact with reality, the lethal operator must understand an ineludible law of thermodynamics. You cannot maintain an absolute vacuum in a cracked vessel. The state of hyperdense concentration is immaterial. However, it is executed within a carbon vehicle, your body, that occupies physical coordinates in a 3D universe. If the physical space you inhabit is porous, the ecosystem's entropy will seep in and destroy your stasis. In solid-state physics, there is an exotic material known as a topological insulator. It has a fascinating property. Its interior is a perfect electrical insulator, where electrons cannot move and the current is zero, but its outer surface is a robust conductor. The interior is mathematically protected against any external perturbation. Your physical environment, your office, your home, must be redesigned to become a topological insulator. We call this architecture the obsidian perimeter. The matrix slave designs his living space for comfort and expression. They fill their offices with photographs and warm colors. They have designed a thermal sponge. The obsidian perimeter, conversely, repudiates biological comfort and embraces geometric hostility. Its only function is to repel. It repels the gas of others' existence and protects the temperature of 0 degrees Kelvin in the core where you operate. Physical space must become the tangible manifestation of your sociopathic repudiation of distraction. You are not building a home, you are constructing a high-pressure chamber for the forging of your own will. The somatic Faraday cage, blocking environmental radiation. The first phase of constructing this perimeter is the sterilization of frequencies. In electromagnetism, a Faraday cage is a metallic box that protects its interior from static electric fields, annulling any radio wave trying to penetrate. The operator executes a somatic Faraday cage. Your workspace must block ecosystem radiation. This begins with the annihilation of passive stimulus. Windows, if they exist, should not offer a visual spectacle of street chaos. They must be veiled to allow only aseptic light. Clutter on a desk is not an aesthetic problem. In neurobiology, every physical object acts as an emitter of cognitive radiation. It steals your millivolts. You clean the geography. You strip the room until only the vacuum and tools of pure execution remain. A bare table of hard gelida materials, a chair designed for combat rectitude, not for a nap. By extirpating every element not coded for the current wave function collapse, you transform the space into an aseptic facility. The absence of visual stimulus annuls ocular friction, allowing metabolic energy to plunge into the cognitive black hole without leaking at the edges. Your brain stops scanning the environment because there is nothing left to scan. The total stillness of the space becomes the mirror of the total stillness of your focused intent. The decontamination airlock, the threshold of terror. A perimeter is not a perimeter if it does not possess a violently defended border. The door to your operations chamber is not a piece of wood to be pushed. It is a decontamination airlock. In high-level biosafety labs, to enter the core where lethal pathogens are handled, personnel must cross pressurized airlocks and chemical showers. The objective is that the exterior atmosphere never mixes with the interior. You must establish an identical protocol for the threshold of your power space. Human biomass, colleagues, relatives, walks through life assuming they have the thermodynamic right to open your door and launch their noise toward your atmosphere. Subject this presumption to the guillotine. The door to your obsidian perimeter must be closed, sealed, and guarded by a policy of inertial terror. You communicate to the ecosystem through dictatorial rigidity that knocking on that door without a life-or-death corporate justification is an act of war. You allow no leaks. When someone inevitably crosses the airlock with a triviality, you apply the punishment. You do not invite them to sit. You offer no hospitality. You stay motionless, looking at them with the iridium eye, forcing them to feel the drastic drop in temperature until their own discomfort expels them. The Matrix will learn to fear your threshold. Architectural hostility, the design that repels biomass. The interior design of weak civilization is meant to foster collaboration and dialogue. Open concept offices and round tables are the architecture of gases. They are designed so that liquid employees mix and dissipate their energy in sterile socialization. The unalterable monarch instates architectural hostility. Within your obsidian perimeter, there are no comforts for the intruder. There are no extra chairs in front of your desk. If an external individual must enter by your mandate to deliver data, they remain standing. Physically above them, or geometrically distanced, you let them know the room is not designed for them to take root. The materials of your sanctuary must reflect your source code: glass, bare metal, dark tones, stone. Inorganic materials that absorb biological heat and return no sympathy. By eradicating warm elements, you repel the mammalian instinct to stay and chat. The intruder feels a subconscious need to flee that cold and oppressive space. By weaponizing interior design, you delegate to the walls the work of expelling attentional parasites, keeping your mental voltage intact. You do not need to speak to be hostile. The room speaks for you. The geometry of the space informs any visitor that their time is a finite resource that is being consumed by your gravity. The holographic Trojan horse, murdering the mobile device. The thickest obsidian wall in the universe is useless if the Guardian voluntarily introduces the enemy into the Citadel's core. In the war for attentional hyperdensity, the mobile device, the smartphone, is the ultimate holographic Trojan horse. The slave isolates himself, locks the door, and then places the phone on his desk. They think they are concentrated. In physical terms, what they have done is open a wormhole directly from their vacuum chamber to the heart of the parasitic egregore. Through that small glass screen, millions of insects and global crises have a direct attack vector toward the visual cortex. The veto on lightness demands its murder. When you cross the decontamination airlock, the communication device does not enter with you. You place it in a different room or lock it in a soundproof drawer outside your visual field. If your work imperatively requires communication, you do it from a restricted desktop terminal where the biomass cannot send you push alerts. By disconnecting the holographic umbilical, the wall of your fortress becomes absolute. The 3D matrix may be screaming and burning miles away, but without the Trojan horse to transmit the echo, the fire is irrelevant to your timeline. You have cut the frequency of the collective, leaving only the frequency of your mandate. The asynchronous dictatorship, corporate strangulation. The obsidian perimeter must be projected onto your corporate and financial empire's architecture. Conventional companies are thermal stress reactors because they operate under the tyranny of synchronization. Slaves demand immediate answers and call meetings to share their ignorance. This is the death of the tectonic plate. The operator who dominates the market imposes the asynchronous dictatorship. You repudiate real-time. You dictate that all communication must be asynchronous, structured reports and aseptic memos. You murder face-to-face meetings. The lethal beauty of asynchronous communication is that it works as a thermal condenser. The subordinate sends data and suffers the anxiety of waiting. You receive it in your vault, let it cool, process it when your own inertial metronome dictates, and issue a calculated order. By strangling communication speed, you eliminate emotional friction. You force your organization to think deeply before bothering you. They know the response cycle from your obsidian perimeter obeys geological laws of gravity, not their hysterical alarms. You have converted your company into a machine that processes logic instead of reacting to panic. By imposing slowness, you guarantee that only high-density information manages to cross your borders. Relational amputation and false duty, subjugating affection. The unassailable wall will face its most violent test, not from competitors, but from effective biology, family, and historical friends. Tribal programming demands they possess a master key to your perimeter. Society dictates that family comes first and that you should always be available for your own. It is a trap. Subject biological affection to the physics of inertial collapse. Affection, when it presents as a demand for time that interrupts your laser's collimation, is not love. It is thermodynamic extortion disguised as false duty. If a sentimental contract demands you break the tyranny of the single thread, that link is a leak. The hyperdense creator executes relational amputation in the tactical space. This does not mean you stop protecting your close ones. You subjugate them to the dictatorship of the inertial calendar. You inform them, with non-negotiable coldness, that inside the obsidian perimeter, you are emotionally unreachable. You are the whole. Any attempt to use guilt or tears to pierce the barrier will be punished with a drastic increase in psychological ice. It is your brutal responsibility to domesticate your inner circle, teaching them that loyalty to your expropriation mandate is infinitely superior to any comfort. The empire does not stop to dry tears. The acoustics of lethargy. The vacuum as a soundtrack. Ambient noise is not just words. It is the friction of the city and sterile music designed to anesthetize silence. The slave requires white noise to concentrate because the silence of his own mind torments him. The architecture of your spatial isolation requires the conquest of the acoustics of lethargy. You need the void. You subject the space to extreme silencing. If your location is subject to ecosystem noise, you use active phase cancellation technology or deep insertion protection to block the world's decibels. You turn off the music. The obsidian perimeter must replicate the soundless vacuum of deep space. It is a heavy silence. In this deafening silence, intracranial pressure increases. You hear the flow of your own blood and your physiology's heartbeat. By depriving the auditory system of friction, neuronal pathways for mathematical analysis expand to fill the void. This is a torture for the liquid man, but for the monolith, it is the soundtrack of power. Tactical nomadism, the ubiquity of the inertial bubble. The obsidian perimeter is not necessarily a static prison built of concrete in one coordinate. If you must move through the world to inspect assets or execute directives in hostile territories, spatial isolation must evolve. You implement tactical nomadism. The inertial bubble moves with you wherever you go. You will learn to transmute any physical space, a crowded airport, the enemy's conference room, into a portable anechoic chamber. You achieve it through the imposition of your geometric posture. You sit with the rigidity of an osmium statue. You establish spectral blindness and tactical deafness immediately and without hesitation. You project an electromagnetic repulsion field so dense that the surrounding biomass instinctively avoids colliding with you, disturbed by the anomaly of your immobility. The zero-friction nomad does not adapt to the environment. He forces the environment to behave with the gelida paralysis of his own central chamber. Dimensional sovereignty. You are the architecture. Erecting the obsidian perimeter culminates in an ontological revelation the slave will never understand. Mastery over physical space is the prelude to mastery over space-time. Biomass asks for permission to occupy space. They shrink in their seats and let others' borders invade their offices. They are fearful tenants. You assume dimensional sovereignty. By sterilizing your perimeter, murdering the mobile device, and castrating effective blackmail, you crown yourself as the absolute dictator of your 3D volume. You have snatched from the world the capacity to touch you. When the physical world discovers it cannot penetrate, it submits. Your decisions, forged in the unassailable darkness of your obsidian bunker, acquire a cosmic weight when you finally release them upon the market. Society obeys inscrutable entities operating from the void, because the void is the face of God for inferior biology. You have built the inorganic temple of collimated attention, the warden of the hermetic vault. Look at yourself in the oppressive and black vastness of your own architectural creation, having blocked all hatches where the slave's vital heat leaked out. You managed to suffocate the container's porosity. You understood that the mind requires a topological insulator to survive entropy and transmuted your environment. You mutilated the intruder's arrogance through the decontamination airlock, using the iridiumized silence to expel the biomass. You executed architectural hostility, replacing warm hospitality with glass and bare metal. You murdered the Trojan horse, extirpating the mobile phone to annul the wormhole of global distraction. You instated the asynchronous dictatorship, strangling corporate communication hysteria to force the ecosystem to obey your own geological clock. You carried out relational amputation, subjugating biological affection to the dictatorship of the inertial mandate, punishing guilt with the ice of loyalty to hyperdensity. You embraced the acoustics of lethargy, using the soundless vacuum to expand the neuronal networks of tyranny, and perfected tactical nomadism. The 3D world crashes against your sanctuary and disintegrates. You are the sovereign of the sterilized space. You are the warden of the hermetic vault. The 9th phase is solid. Chapter 10. Focused Gravity, the Collapse of Matter Through Attention. The attentional mass equation, the weight of unified consciousness. The architecture of the VETO on lightness has forced you to traverse a hell of deprivation. You have sealed thermal leaks, decapitated sensory noise, collimated your incandescent light, suffocated entertainment, and assumed the core of singularity. You have accumulated all your energy in the center of your skull. Now understand the physics. Human biomass perceives attention as an abstract phenomenon without material repercussions. Subject this fallacy to general relativity. Einstein proved that energy and mass are interchangeable, and that any extreme concentration of either warps the fabric of space-time, generating gravity. Your attention, when compressed, is now a metric phenomenon. You have achieved attentional mass. When your neurological voltage does not dissipate in 1,000 cheap distractions, it accumulates in a single mathematical point. That accumulation generates an immaterial hyperdensity. By fixing this upon a 3D target, you are exerting focused gravity directly upon matter. It is an unyielding law. The physical universe has no choice but to bend toward the center of that attraction. Inertial greatness is not achieved by chasing reality. It is achieved by weighing so much that reality has no choice but to fall toward you. You stop being a spectator of the simulation to become the heavy anchor that dictates its geometry and its flow. The end of kinetic friction, why pushing is for slaves. Control system indoctrination bases its entire theology on kinetic friction. They teach the slave that power is obtained by pushing. You have to push your career, push your employees, and push the doors of the market until they open. Pushing requires movement. Movement generates thermodynamic friction. Pushing is a sign of weakness. Friction generates caloric wear, biological pain, and eventual material fatigue. He who pushes always ends up bleeding. The lethal operator, armed with focused gravity, instates the end of kinetic friction. A black hole does not push the planets it wishes to assimilate. It simply exists with a terrifying density. You are that density. The planets fall toward the star by their own weight. When you sit in the obsidian perimeter and aim your single-thread consciousness at your target, you stop pushing. You abandon muscular effort. Your work transmutes from kinetic violence to static violence. You maintain unalterable focus for days without emitting a single gram of stress. This invisible gravitational pressure forces the ecosystem to perform all the work of approaching you. Solutions emerge and capital flows to your accounts not because you went hunting, but because you created a geometric decline in space-time that forces success to roll to your feet. You are the destination, never the seeker. Local space-time deformation, the reality distortion field. The empirical manifestation of focused gravity is a measurable effect on the behavior of matter and the biomass around you. In astrophysics, massive objects curve the straight lines of space, forcing light and matter to follow deformed paths. When you hold the VETO on lightness at its peak, you generate local space-time deformation. People who enter your jurisdiction experience an immediate alteration of their own physics. They feel an inexplicable pressure in their chest. Their biological voices become shaky and submissive. The hysterical haste they brought from outside is paralyzed upon hitting your stasis. They begin to doubt their own laws and certainties. They doubt because your gravity is so atrocious it bends their mental axioms. The corporate world calls this a reality distortion field, but it is simply the thermodynamics of submission. By not doubting and not emitting heat, your presence becomes an inorganic monolith. You impose your will without speaking. You are the heaviest mind. Sustained wave function collapse, the unbribable retina. In quantum mechanics, the Copenhagen interpretation establishes that reality exists in a state of probabilistic superposition until an observer measures it. The act of measurement collapses the wave function and forces the particle to define itself. The problem of the dispersed human is that their observation is fleeting. It is weak. They look at their goal for 5 seconds and then get distracted by their holographic device or biological fears. By withdrawing the gaze, matter returns to its gaseous and probabilistic state. The universe regains its freedom. Focused gravity demands sustained wave function collapse. You do not withdraw your iridium retina. You execute an unbribable gaze. You maintain fixed, aseptic, and cruel observation for uninterrupted hours. By sustaining observation without a millisecond of distraction, you deny the universe the chance to revert to chaos. You trap material reality in the coordinate you dictated. You nail it against the wall of space-time. The longer you maintain this collapse, the faster probability fossilizes into physical matter. The success of your work does not depend on technical talent. It depends exclusively on your psychopathic capacity to not look away until the concrete has completely dried. You are the witness that forces the simulator to render your result. Expropriation by subjection, matter seeks rest. The second law of thermodynamics dictates that energy and matter always seek the state of least friction and greatest rest. The 3D ecosystem is full of resources, capital, talent, technology, in a state of agitation, jumping from one scared individual to another. Matter hates being in the hands of anxiety. It seeks stability. By having instated your obsidian perimeter and focused gravity, you have become the only coordinate of zero friction for hundreds of miles around. You execute expropriation by subjection. You do not steal talent or snatch capital through kinetic violence. capital and resources, exhausted by human vibration, feel your suction. They observe your operative lethargy. They perceive that in your hands there is no fear, no haste, and no distraction. Matter is sucked toward your empire because your static core is the only place in the matrix where resources can crystallize in peace. Power flows to you as water flows to the valley, obeying geometric inertia. The punishment of immobility, crushing resistance with silence. The offensive application of focused gravity reaches its climax when facing resistance. Despite your density, the universe will eventually interpose a hard obstacle, a flat refusal in a billion-dollar negotiation or a legal siege. The slave, facing resistance, accelerates. They panic, speak faster, and offer concessions. They burn their inertial capital, demonstrating thermodynamic vulnerability. The lethal operator applies the punishment of immobility. When the barrier rises, you do not retreat or accelerate. You instantaneously increase your specific mass. You become heavier. If the interlocutor says no, you do not argue. You stay silent. You keep your gaze fixed on their pupils without emitting a single phoneme. You hold the silence with the oppression of a geological fault. The focused gravity of your soundless silence begins to crush the obstacle's psyche. Biomass cannot endure immobility. They feel they are losing oxygen. They question their own refusal. Their barriers crack under the atmospheric pressure of an organism that does not need to speak to dominate the room. By refusing to fight and choosing simply to weigh more, enemy resistance is pulverized by panic-induced structural fracture. You win by being an unmovable wall against which their desperation shatters into dust. The executor's singularity, fusion between operator and mandate. The final defect of 3D attention is the dualistic separation between the one who works and the work. The slave is always self-conscious. They think, I am writing, I am hungry, I want to finish. This self-consciousness is a brutal thermal leak that prevents total density. Focused gravity demands the sacrifice of the I. You must reach the executor's singularity. When you apply the collimated laser long enough in your perimeter, the border between your consciousness and the mathematical target vanishes. The ego dies. There is no longer an individual working. There is only the work executing itself. You become the code. You become the equation. This atomic fusion completely annuls mental fatigue, as fatigue is a byproduct of the ego trying to sustain identity. In the state of singularity, your data processing capacity and reality restructuring speed reach anomalous levels. You are an inorganic machine operating without the interference of biological pain or emotion. When the thread ends and your consciousness returns to your carbon container, you look at the work performed and do not recognize its author. The inertial deity that executed it has no name, no face, and no mammalian needs. You have become a pure tool of the cosmos, an efficient vector of the simulation's definitive reconfiguration. Corporate wormholes, inertial shortcuts. Reality deformation caused by focused gravity bends not only space, but also temporal distance. In theoretical physics, a wormhole connects two distant points, allowing a geometric shortcut. In the architecture of power, the slave is condemned to the long road. They think they must climb biological steps for 30 years. They travel in a straight line through a curved and dense space. The hyperdense operator uses his concentration to open corporate wormholes. Since you have amputated social friction and unified your voltage, you do not walk. You fold the board. By concentrating power on the exact pivot point, you achieve results in a month. You achieve what would cost the biomass 3 decades. You expropriate the summit without having traveled the slopes. The human herd will call your dizzying rise fraud or luck, unable to understand that luck does not exist. There is only gravitational manipulation. You arrived first because you did not stop to greet the tourists. Local extinction event, annihilating thermal competition. The material universe functions under a zero-sum economy regarding local mass and energy. Your massive accumulation of focused gravity has a terrifying and thermodynamically inevitable side effect on organisms sharing your industry. The local extinction event. As your black hole becomes denser, it strips competitors of atmosphere. Market attention, efficient suppliers, and brilliant minds stop looking at the competition and are irremediably sucked into your force field. Your adversaries will try to counter your advance with marketing and desperate innovation, injecting heat into their boilers. It is useless. No kinetic effort can compete against pure gravity. You absorb their oxygen. By staying inscrutable and single-thread focused, you force competitors to die of attentional starvation. Their corporations dry up. Their relevance evaporates. You execute their destruction without a single word against them. You annihilate them for the physical crime of being lighter than you. The creator of the new paradigm, the veto on lightness, has culminated its destructive work. You have extirpated the gaseous nature of your mind, condensing attention until forcing a phase transition in the material universe. The operator who masters focused gravity is no longer an inhabitant of the ashboard, he is the creator of the new paradigm. You are no longer subject to laws of supply and demand because you generate demand with the weight of your immobility. You no longer depend on luck because quantum uncertainty collapses terrified before the dictatorship of your retina. In this supreme state, you do not need to pursue, plead, or connect with the biomass. Humanity and matter become mere hydraulic fluids that obey the pressure of your pipes. You have converted your mind into the most lethal physical anomaly of the cosmos, a space of absolute silence where distraction is dead, the biological ego is extinct, and time stops to observe how the iridium monolith writes history. Sovereign of the attentional mass, look at yourself in the abyssal deformation you caused in the matrix, having decapitated effort friction to govern through the pure and deaf weight of gravity. You managed to suffocate the physics of dispersion, understanding the attentional mass equation and transmuting concentration into a geometric force that bends space. You mutilated the end of kinetic friction, repudiating slave sweat to assume static violence. You executed local space-time deformation, altering the environment's heart rate with your lethargic presence. You imparted sustained wave function collapse, pinning the unbribable gaze upon the target to deny chaos any reversion. You applied expropriation by subjection, attracting resources toward the only zero friction coordinate. You punished resistance with immobility, pulverizing obstacles through atmospheric pressure. You merged into the executor's singularity and unleashed the local extinction event by simple gravitational superiority. Stay heavy. Conclusion: the unalterable monolith, the triumph of the heavy core. The extinction of gaseous man. Stop your mind's machinery for a geological split second and contemplate the thermodynamic wasteland you have left in your wake. You have traversed the matrix of distraction and executed the veto on lightness with the aseptic violence of an iridium guillotine. Look outward from your obsidian perimeter. Witness the human biomass. Observe the 3D herd, still trapped in the gas of its own existence. They float, collide, become indignant, and dissipate. Watch them consume the cheap fire of entertainment, jumping from one fresh stimulus to another, terrified of silence, bleeding their vital energy into trivial opinions about a world they will never be able to control. That was your original ecosystem. That was the parasite's design to keep you weak, translucent, and lacking mass. But you have declared war on attentional entropy, and you have won. The gaseous man is dead within you, replaced by a structure that does not evaporate, does not drift, and does not yield to the winds of the simulation. The forge of hyperdensity. The path to the heavy core required the systematic sacrifice of your own dispersed humanity. You understood that attention was not a flashlight to stroll through the darkness, but the only gravitational mass capable of bending the material universe. You instated the sensory guillotine, amputating the ecosystem's noise entirely. You became psychopathically deaf to the panic of the weak. You ceased to be an incandescent bulb, dimly lighting its own misery, and collimated your mental voltage into a laser capable of piercing the market's steel. You suffocated leisure, embraced the thermodynamics of monotony, and chained your biology to the stasis of novelty. You refused to pay the tribe's ideological toll, executing the veto on opinion to reach a zero-friction profile that social criticism could not touch. You built the airlock of your own spatial isolation and, finally, subjected yourself to the tyranny of the single thread, crushing the lie of oscillation and merging with gravity. The anatomy of the monolith. The result of this relentless quantum compression is the birth of the unalterable monolith. You are no longer a reactive organism desperately defending itself against interruptions. You have transmuted into a cognitive black hole. Your attentional density is so obscene and absolute that the concept of effort has disappeared. It has vanished from your source code. You no longer need to push reality with the brute force of your muscles or the hysterical stress of your vocal cords. The monolith does not push. The monolith occupies space. By having closed all escape valves and eradicated the need for cheap dopamine, your static presence generates a warp. It generates a deformation in the space-time of your industry, your corporation, or your territory. Matter, capital, and influence fall toward you by pure gravitational inertia, seeking the rest that only your deaf immobility can offer them. You are the heaviest geography in the room, the point where all simulation lines converge. The triumph of deaf inertia. In this supreme state of architectural and mental isolation, you have murdered anxiety. Stress is the byproduct of doubting between two trajectories or trying to keep multiple timelines open. But since you have burned contingency plans and chained yourself to a single vector, doubt has no oxygen to burn in your skull. You operate under a paramilitary lethargy, cutting the matrix from a distance with the aseptic precision of one who knows that wave function collapse is mathematically inevitable if the unbribable gaze does not turn away. Competitors who try to hit you splinter against your surface, unable to understand how an entity advances. They cannot grasp how you move without emitting heat, without celebrating premature victories, and without blinking. You have transformed the absence of distraction into the most devastating siege and expropriation weapon of modern civilization. Your silence is a crushing weight that deconstructs the will of any opposing organism. The sovereign of the VETO. The work is finished. The gas has been completely purged. The hatches of your hermetic vault have been closed and sealed from the inside, isolating your hyperdense core from the ionizing radiation of human hysteria. Inside, in the abyssal silence of your vacuum chamber, there are no bright screens or emergency notifications. There is no hallway gossip, nor sterile moral debates. Only the gelida purity of operative absolute zero and the inorganic decree of your next conquest exist. The external universe may burn in the fever of its algorithmic novelties, it may tear itself apart in the stupid friction of its opinions, and it may slowly dissolve. It will dissolve in the entertainment of its own decay. You will remain intact, observing from the other side of your event horizon. You have expropriated your own mind from the hands of the system. You are the architect of your stasis, the executor of coherent light, and the inscrutable monarch of gravity. You have crossed. The threshold is behind you. Lightness has been vetoed forever, and the unalterable monolith now stands upon the ashes of time, dictating the laws of material reality through the majestic and silent tyranny of its indivisible attention. Rule the vacuum. Maintain the density. Stay cold. The simulation now obeys your weight.